Yo, it's time, my friend. We've reached the bottom of the Creepypasta. I wish I could tell you that our journey is near its end, but in truth, it's really only just begun. This is what I've been waiting for. What does this place look like to you? A mansion, right? Like something from Resident Evil, perhaps? It'll do that. You see, at the very bottom of the Creepypasta Island, past all the strange monsters and edgy teenagers, cursed objects, and just generally cringy weirdos, sits something truly special. A dream machine, capable of conjuring up places you're somewhat familiar with. The truth, however, is we have entered its maze. The belly of the beast, you might say. Despite the outward appearances, this is but just a perception of the mind. Something to make sense of the otherwise otherworldly environment that we truly find ourselves within. One might say that it's the entire reason this island exists to begin with. After all, creepypastas aren't real, they only exist within our minds. An illusion made up from our imagination. Our dreams, you might say. Now that we've gotten this far, I suppose I ought to come clean. I've come here to reach the dream machine's center, to make a wish. For you see, at its very center, reality and fantasy are one and the same. And so you can conjure up anything that you could imagine, anything that you could want into being. It's through this that I'll finally have something I've always wanted. It's also going to be our only means of escaping this place, as a little hint. So stay close. Otherwise, you might find yourself lost within the maze of dreams forever. Listen to the stories I tell you closely. Should you fall asleep, step out of the sound of my voice now. You shall enter the darkness of the tale by which I speak. Yet if I do not continue to speak of these tales, this place will twist us both into something unrecognizable. We do not keep our heads firmly within the thoughts of stories. Our imaginations shall warp us into the very things that we think. So, with that in mind, take my hand, O brave traveler, my faithful companion. Are you ready? I dared my best friend to ruin my life. Now this is one of those creepypastas that you would find in a creepy mansion inside a volcano. What I mean by that is this is a pasta in a league of its own. Now, the title of the story sort of reveals what the plot is about, but allow me to read you part of the opening chapter to this tale, so you can get a better idea of its contents. Quote, "My name is Xander, and my best friend is trying to ruin my life. It started out very small, but it has quickly grown out of control. I'm currently sitting inside a church, using their Wi-Fi to post a story and taking advantage of their air conditioning. I'm posting this story in case he finds me and kills me soon. It's only a matter of time now, and I want someone to know what happened before I die. 2 years ago, my friend David and I were sitting on the couch at my house, thoroughly bored. It wasn't a temporary boredom either. It was a resounding boredom with life. We both worked full-time at a local movie theater making minimum wage and cleaning up after idiots who couldn't keep popcorn and soda in their mouths. We had graduated high school 2 years prior and had no plans to attend college. Life looked bleak for us. College didn't sound appealing, work was annoying, and the little free time we had was blown on video games and YouTube. We both still lived with our parents too, which made dating somewhat embarrassing. Looking back, I'm sure we're suffering from mild depression on top of everything else. These circumstances blended together to create the perfect storm for what I now have to call my reality. As we sat on the couch at my parents' house, channel surfing the TV, David asked me if I was bored with life. I responded in the positive inside. High school was so easy because we knew our purpose and our goals were set out for us. Outline the English essay, finish the math homework, get decent grades, pass the driving exam, be home by curfew, find a girlfriend. Now that we're out of high school, there's no structure. Our lives have become meaningless, and we are just floating through space with no aim or purpose. Would you go back to high school then? I asked. He shook his head. In the moment, high school was annoying. It's only after looking back that I see how much better it was than I realized. What's the solution then? I asked. Either go somewhere that has structure and can deliver what high school gave us, or create our own structure, David replied. Well, I don't want to go to college or the military, I said, and I can't think of anywhere else that provides the same structure. Guess I have to make my own, but I have no idea where to start. The thing about high school was that it required a minimum effort. If you didn't give that minimum effort, you would face the consequences. The consequences were bad enough that you and I would put the effort into school. When high school ended, the minimum effort level decreased. Now our minimum effort is not enough to improve ourselves. Whatever structure we build has to have some consequences built in, and a minimum effort that forces us to improve constantly. David was, and is, a very intellectual person. Thinks about everything, if you can't already tell. I was pretty dumb compared to him, but I stuck around because he always had interesting things to say. This conversation definitely counted as interesting. I won't bore you with the entire conversation that we had, but it lasted an hour where we discussed how to build structure in our lives. I want to emphasize here that boredom is dangerous. Well, it's not dangerous by itself, but it can quickly lead to dangerous things. Boredom can lead to pain, accidental children, technology that disrupts a monopoly, and even death. Our boredom led to a dare. I dare you to try and ruin my life, David said. What does that mean? I asked. It's a way to build structure into my life. If I know that you are always trying to ruin my life and actively trying to make me fail, then I am driven to fight back and act on initiative. But how could I ruin your life? I asked. You could ruin anyone's life if you gave it enough thought, planning, and action, David said with a smirk. I'm not going to give you any ideas. I just want you to try and ruin my life. I remember sitting back and thinking about what he meant. The first thoughts that came to my mind were about tripping him occasionally or hiding his toothbrush every time I went to his house. My young mind didn't fully understand how serious David was being. His mind was running 3 tracks above mine, so I didn't know what I was getting into when I said, okay, I'll try and ruin your life, but I dare you to try and ruin my life as well. He smiled with a newfound enthusiasm, and I smiled back. I had hoped it would be a great way to relieve my boredom with life. David stood up and punched me in the leg as hard as he could. I shouted at him, mostly out of surprise. He just laughed. The dare starts now, he said, grabbing his shoes. We are no longer friends. We are nemesis. He opened my front door and looked over his shoulder. Good luck, he said. I hope you'll work half as hard as I will, unquote. It's an interesting setup for a creepypasta. Hell, a story in general, and what follows certainly delivers, as David King starts making moves against our protagonist, subtly and eventually overtly ruining his life, before things really escalate in this game of cat and mouse. I go into more detail, but it's a fairly long one full of twists and turns, and if this sounds at all interesting to you, I would highly recommend going and giving it a read or listening to someone read it yourself. I don't hear it talked about very often, but this is seriously a well-written thriller story with an antagonist that always manages to be one step ahead, boredom and seemingly having no real reason to live motivating him to become a terrible force, but one that for the most part stays fairly grounded in reality. There's a lot of details about identity theft, cybersecurity, and contacting the police that are all used in clever ways to further trap Xander in his abject hell David eventually puts him through. Truly a great read or listen with how well paced and put together the whole story is. I Dared My Best Friend to Ruin My Life is seriously one of the best creepypastas that not as many people know about. Generation Loss. This one's very short and goes as follows. Quote, in 2007, a British audio programmer and electronic musician attempted to make a video documenting generation loss, which is when one tape is copied from another, but each incarnation wears the quality down by a certain amount. He used a spare tape recorded by a friend in the early 90s, featuring footage of a nearby intersection, edited his own music into the clip, and then copied it back and forth until the footage had deteriorated enough. However, this clip circulated on 4chan's Sector B in the mid-2008, with first-hand reports claiming that watching the entire video in one sitting caused a sharp burning sensation in the back of the skull. Common side effects included hearing screams deep inside the tape's grinding music, seeing human shapes and static, and seeing a disturbingly thin young boy in the window to the immediate left of the yellow traffic lights, whom is staring directly at the viewer. While the effects can be avoided by pausing the video and watching or reading anything else for any amount of time, it is unknown what will happen to an individual if the entire video is consumed without stopping, as these effects vary from person to person. Some users have reported long-term effects of seeing the skeletal boy around them in public or hearing vague whispers and clicking. One user reportedly committed exit the game of life out of desperation by throwing himself from his apartment window, his body discovered to have severe bruising on the back of his skull, unquote. This one starts off very interesting and then kind of completely and utterly falls apart as soon as the second paragraph opens. I guess it's a basic enough urban legend type story, but I thought it was going to go somewhere much more interesting than it did. A game of flashlight tag. This is one of those stories that despite it being quite good, I also never really hear about. This pasta opens with our narrator noting what flashlight tag entails, and how it was a popular game for everyone in his neighborhood to play. Quote, when I was 10, I played a late night game of flashlight tag with a bunch of neighborhood kids. If you don't know what flashlight tag is, it's the same as tag, but you played in the dark. The person who's it gets a flashlight, and they have to yell the name of the person they see with it in order to tag them. It was really cloudy that night, and most people had their curtains drawn, so it was the perfect level of darkness for hiding in. The side of the street my house was on was skirted by a broad length of woods. That was basically our boundary for our side of the game. You could run through any yard, even go across the street and run through their yards. But you weren't allowed to hide in the woods because it was too difficult to find anyone in there, and it was very easy to trip over tree limbs or end up in poison oak. Of course, this rule was frequently and flagrantly ignored when people got too close to being caught. They duck off into the bushes for a few seconds or run behind a group of trees to evade capture, unquote. From here, our narrator notes how one night he was hiding in the backyard of a house 2 or 3 houses down from his own. He ended up being pretty lucky for a while until a flashlight came around the corner and flashed him right in the eyes. He began running into the woods to duck for cover, but something was a bit off. The person holding the flashlight wasn't chasing him. Quote, they shined the light right in my face, and I tried to cover it with my hand to avoid identification. The creepy thing was, they never said anything, just shined that light on me. You got me, I explained, hoping that if it was a homeowner, they'd realize I thought they were the flashlight tagger. And I realized that 2 houses down, people were yelling and there was the it guy's flashlight beam chasing them around. I stood up and tried to see who was shining the light on me. They just stood there, not moving, not saying anything. I felt a little freaked out. If you don't want us playing in your yard, I'll go tell them it's off limits, okay? The person started walking toward me. It didn't feel right. So I started walking towards the edge of the yard. The person just kept shining the light on me and coming towards me. So I ran. When I looked back, the person with the flashlight was running too, and they were an adult. much bigger and much faster than me. I felt scared now, but not sure why this person was chasing me. I was running toward where the other kids had been, but they were gone now. It seemed to be me and the person with the flashlight. So I turned right and ducked into the woods. I dropped to the ground, shaking bushes and stuff to try and confuse the person, then shimmied under a ring of thick bushes and curled up. I could see the flashlight in the woods with me. Looking around, I could hear the person's footsteps breaking sticks and crunching on pine needles. I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I just wanted to get back to all the other kids. Eventually, the flashlight wandered deeper into the woods and I crawled, quiet as a mouse, back to the edge of the trees, then got up and ran towards the street, unquote. Our narrator is eventually caught by the actual it guy, and when he warns them not to go into the woods, they just run off, not wanting to get caught by the new it guy. Our narrator continues playing, but anxiously watching now for who that could have been. Before later in the night, Charlotte, a girl who was a year younger than our narrator, and who usually hung around her own house so she could quickly run back inside her own house if she was afraid of the dark, was in a place that was very unusual for her. She was standing in the woods. Quote, "Charlotte, I see you," I yelled. She just stood there. I continued to hold the light on her and call her name, but she didn't seem to move. She stood there, partially obscured by a tree, and looked at me. Distance between us was enough that I couldn't see if she was blinking or not, but she had her head propped at an angle like she was looking around the trunk at me with her mouth hanging slightly open. Every now and then, she sort of twitched or squirmed. It was a real freaky kind of movement. "Charlotte, come out of there," I yelled. "Everybody, Charlotte's it, but she won't come out of the woods." Some kids, including my friend Dustin, appeared behind me and started joining in my yell for Charlotte to come out. "Do you see her?" I asked. "Yeah, she's over there behind that tree." "Charlotte, get over here," Dustin said, but she wouldn't come. "Charlotte, are you okay? Get over here, dummy." Charlotte seemed to stand up straighter and then disappear behind the tree. We could hear movement, but it seemed to be going away rather than toward us. Dustin started shouting Charlotte's name again and trudging into the woods after her, but I grabbed him and gave him the flashlight to take with him. I was scared again, because this all seemed surreal. I went to Charlotte's house and knocked until her father answered, unquote. The whole group went into the woods after her until eventually Charlotte's father ordered the kids to all go home and ask their parents for help, and that they were going to call the police. A search then began, and it didn't take too long. 2 days after her disappearance, she was found dead and stuffed into a drain pipe with a broken neck and several stab wounds. Quote, "My parents wouldn't tell me about it. They thought it would upset me, but Dustin told me all the details at school the next day. It was the most awful thing our town had ever had happen. The police blocked off the logging road and spent months tracking down loggers and truckers who frequently used it. There was a curfew for months, and we were told to not play flashlight tag anymore. We didn't argue. What leaves me shaking to this day is the memory of Charlotte's face, hanging out from behind the tree, looking at me. Sometimes I wonder if, at that moment, I had been witnessing her death, and I wonder if it had almost been me," unquote. And that's flashlight tag. A simple concept with a rather haunting ending. Thomas. So this one was made quite famous by YouTuber Michael Leroy, and his reading of the story in his and his friends' long-going series, Bad Creepypasta. A shout out to them, by the way. If you like diving deep into the worst of the worst as far as creepypastas go, they happily provide many years of content for you to enjoy. That being said, Thomas is about this school outcast named Thomas, who was pretty well known for doing great in his classes, was rather skinny but could pack a real wallop of a punch, and was well known for the glare he gave the other kids in the school. He was expressionless, void of emotion. Anyway, after the story notes how much of an outsider and creepy dude Thomas is, the story then goes on about this girl named Valerie Hudson, who is also an outsider and is head over heels in love with Thomas. And so, a good chunk of the story then follows Valerie and Thomas's relationship as it goes from a friendship to maybe something more. We also see Thomas's home life is, well, quite bad, with his dad constantly drunk and his mom apparently having committed exit the game of life after an argument with her husband in which she threatened to do as such and wanted to prove that she meant it. Ever since then, something snapped in Thomas. A fire of rage was constantly on the verge of coming out, Because you see, Thomas saw past the one-way mirror of life. He saw the world as an ugly thing full of evil people, and he hated anyone who was generally happy with their life. I'm paraphrasing, but the story really does have this whole speech about how much life sucks and what have you. Well, anyway, Thomas thinks that maybe Valerie is his key to letting go of his anger and what have you. But of course, like every other one of these types of stories, you then get some cartoonishly mean bullies start to bully Thomas and Valerie pretty much out of the fucking blue, smacking them with lead pipes. And Thomas' response to this is breaking one of their necks, stabbing one of them with one of the lead pipes through the bully's skull, and then, with a regular-ass knife, let me emphasize that, with a regular-ass knife, decapitates 5 other bullies with one swing each. Fucking how many Monster Energy drinks did this emo kid fucking drink to do that? At any rate, the story ends with Thomas having easily, absolutely destroying the fucking bullies. And let me emphasize that. They're fucking destroyed. Not killed, destroyed by Thomas. Which Valerie finds pretty hot. And they both kiss, and yeah, that's pretty much how the story ends. It's nothing that we haven't seen before on this iceberg, but this one is one of those that's more apparent with its Mary Sue or Gary Stu self-insert type of story, since Thomas as a character is basically smart, strong, cool, he gets the girl, and he has no consequences for his actions, he always wins, he's very opinionated, and the story works in such a way that his very stupid opinion is always correct. Oh, and, you know, the story's also full of grammatical errors, but I suppose that sort of comes with the territory at this point. We're kind of splitting hairs, you know, when we get to the grammatical stuff at some point. Bad Night Out. So this one seems rather obscure, and was kind of difficult to figure out which one of the actual iceberg wanted me to discuss, given how many stories have very similar titles to this one. However, the one I found first was a story about a woman who loves going to watch horror movies at night at the cinema. But she's actually not a human. She's a strange sort of monster that looks like a human, but has these black leech-like creatures that crawl in and out of her mouth to go and feed on the blood of other moviegoers. And then they come back to her so they can feed all the blood to her. That's kind of it. The story pretty much begins and ends with this admittingly kind of cool concept for a monster, and that's it. The Mario Theory. So, this one is a doozy. It's a troll pasta, but one hell of a good one. And by good, I mean bad, of course. The basic premise here being that the Super Mario Bros. Games are based off of a real-life story of Mario Lombardi, which involves Mario trying to save a woman named Paula or something. She's who Peach is based off of in this story, who is kidnapped by some fucking creep who Bowser is meant to represent. Well, Mario ends up failing at first to save her when he sees her kidnapped on the street, and after he follows the assailant to his home and screams outside the house because he was scared to run in, as soon as he does run into the house to save her after already alerting the guy who kidnapped her, he is then held by gunpoint by the Bowser guy to walk into an animal cage, and is then tossed down a set of basement stairs wherein a fucking chimpanzee mauls his legs. The screaming, angry chimpanzee mauling his legs is meant to be what Donkey Kong is based off of. Mario ends up killing the angry monkey with a fucking hammer on the floor. Meanwhile, Peach is being brutally, multiple times, and then reptiles start eating her skin and organs while she chokes on a dead turtle. Yep, that makes sense to me. So Mario does end up crawling his way up the stairs and into the room, and then kills the guy who killed Peach in this awful manner. And to make a long story short, this is what Nintendo apparently thought was the perfect inspiration for creating their signature franchise, Super Mario Bros. Oh, and also, Mario dies later in the story after having given permission to Nintendo to tell his life story through a game via an acid overdose. The end. There's a bit more to the story, but that's the gist. And since it's meant to be a troll pasta, I don't want to waste too much time on it, but it is still quite something, and if you've never, listened to a reading of it, I would highly recommend it. It is quite the ride. Frosty the Snowman. I've looked high and low, and as far as I can tell, the only creepypasta called Frosty the Snowman is this one from Creepypasta.com, which confusingly enough has Frosty the Snowman as the title, but then when you click on the actual story, it's actually titled Soul Survivor. So with that said, let's give it a read. It was cold, bitterly so. It was not the unforgiving December wind creating lazy vortexes in the freshly falling snow. Rather, it was the numbness that consumed both body and soul in one fatal unseen breeze. It also did not escape him that his surroundings seemingly felt the same, bleak and deserted. Perhaps deserted was not the proper term. Being 2 days before Christmas, there was many people filling the cityscape. Some gathered under the building awnings for shelter. Others slumped in their cars, locked bumper to bumper, and still others reclined upon street benches waiting for public transportation that would never come. Even the bodies sprawled awkwardly here and there in the street and on the sidewalks testified this city was not deserted. No birds perched in rotting trees which arched in the darkened sky. No Christmas shoppers hustled and bustled for last-minute gifts. No children warred with other children in the time-honored battle of snowball superiority. Dead. A condemning chill raced through him, the speed of thought. I am alone. However, this was not his first exposure to loneliness. For the past decade, he had spent his existence secluded in the beautifully barren confines of a Canadian parcel of land in the Arctic Circle. The sub-zero temperatures were of little concern. In fact, the serrated blades of Arctic wind refreshed and strengthened him. Curiously, this environment inspired his continued survival and kept him safe in an Arctic embrace, although the prospect of longevity outweighed the void of companionship in his early years. His later years were a true test of sanity and solitude. Occasionally, the old man would visit him, briefly dispersing the looming shade of lethal boredom. The old man's eyes forever sparkled with an eternal hope, and always offering a jovial laugh with any story, suspending the soulless sorrow of isolation. Unfortunately, that cheer could not prevent the predator of loneliness from eagerly returning shortly after the old man departed, and on his way to whatever brought him out of his happy home in the first place. In those days without the comfort of another, he would curse the warmth of friends, trying unsuccessfully to deny he even needed companionship. Yet, deep down, he knew he would instantly return to civilization in a heartbeat. However, he knew he could not return, as the enemy would be waiting, and the enemy would not take pity on him. His nemesis was far more omniscient, but the beast need not be. His foe had spread his influence all about countries, cities, and suburbs like a virulent plague. In these places, no one could hide from the beast. The enemy did have a weakness, a brief period of impotency every year. Yet, he still felt unsure as to the beast's machinations, as those periods were not easily measured. So he played it safe against the enemy with the deadly gaze, and kept to the safety of his frozen sanctuary. He had not forgotten that terrifying first encounter. He remembered the incident with crystal clear accuracy, burned into him like a glowing brand, iron-kissing virgin flesh. The morning had sleepily awakened when the enemy attacked with sadistic fury. His body had become a well of pain under the beast's well-honed talons, feeling as if millions of razor blades ripped into him. Every pore screamed, yet the beast drank freely from his essence, one excruciating sip at a time. He felt the scoffing eyes of the enemy toying with him, as if to say, the worst is yet to come. He knew further hellacious torments awaited him if he did not immediately retreat. Racked with deep pain, he fled to the outer reaches of northern Canada, a place where his nemesis did not follow. Perhaps it was the extreme temperatures or the geography. Nonetheless, the enemy had, in one ironic stroke, condemned him to his frigid tundra and saved him, but now he stood defiantly in the realm of his nemesis. Fearless of retaliation, the enemy had been placed in check, and he knew it. The crux of the conflict occurred months prior, in the deep night sky. Stars seductively winked at him as he watched the glorious beauty of the northern lights swaying in heaven's inky darkness. Then he noticed a peculiar object falling from the sky. A meteorite? An old space satellite? Whatever the cause, the object maintained a purposeful nature. It was then that a second, then a third, then a fourth meteorite appeared. They seemed to multiply exponentially. The meteorites gashed the serene sky as the stars retreated under the onslaught of hundreds of projectiles. Repulsed, he turned away from the aerial horde, only to find a mirror of the same on the opposite horizon. Seemingly ignorant of each other, the projectiles laced between one another. Most sped off to their destination unmolested, but occasionally some would cross paths, issuing an eruption of brutal luminescence. It was then that he realized the bright explosive flashes were missiles, nuclear missiles. He could not bear to watch the horror, and retreated to the confines of his igloo. It was like sleeping through a distant thunderstorm, as the mechanical abominations rumbled across the atmosphere, with small flashes like a violent destructive heat lightning. When he left his igloo much later, he noticed the sky, or rather, the absence of it. In its place was a dirty gray film of sediment, thick and smothering. The nuclear bombs had tossed the wastes of their destruction into the atmosphere, defying the stars to shine, or even a satellite to broadcast an important emergency broadcasting system message down to our planet. The Earth had become a lightless coffin, with an ecological nightmare as a casket lid. He guessed that what the nukes didn't vaporize, or the radiation didn't kill, the polluted atmosphere would handily finish off. Weeks later, he heard a voice at his door. "Anybody home?" It was the weakened voice of the old man. When he laid his dark eyes upon the old man, he stared with a mixture of sympathy and revulsion. Radiation had taken control of the old man's body. Putrid facial lesions were painfully visible, and large patches of now hairless sections of his head had been replaced by wet, runny red splotches. Thick green mucus and saliva ran unchecked from the old man's nose and mouth, and the old man's swollen, irradiated hands were as red and puffy as the parka he wore. "Just thought I'd stop by for a visit." The old man tried to chuckle, which turned into a bout of racking, painful coughing. The light was fading fast. "Well, my boy, even though I know you've been naughty, it doesn't do me much good. The Earth is dying, my boy. I'm pretty wily, but..." The old man stared at the bloody holes in his fingers where nails once grew. "Even I'm not immune. Matter of fact, my last pack animal passed away about a half-mile from here. Poor Don. He tried, but those nukes take the fight out of you." Tears welled and ran down the old man's sunken cheeks. "Please, you can't." "Don't start on me," the old man cut in. "We all gotta go sometime. Just never thought we'd all go at the same time. We're all dead, my boy. Every plant and animal, dead or dying, except you." The old man fell to the floor of the igloo, hacking blood and lung tissue. He cradled the old man as he continued to hack. "God, how I pity you. You'll survive. I just age slow, but you..." Another series of coughs shook the old man's frame. "So sorry," the old man sputtered, before a violent death rattle extinguished the remaining fire from his eyes. Now, as he stood in the silence of the gray soot in midwestern town that spawned before him, he reflected on those who gave him life. His makers knew very little of the arcane arts, yet, caught in the throes of creativity, these youthful wizards had used base alchemy and common elements to give him life. Was it, he thought, a magical device? My creator's desire? Fate? Hand of God? Frankly, he did not have the reasoning capacity to properly analyze such an esoteric subject, nor did he care to dwell long upon it. The most vivid memory he had was the day the beast had forced him to leave. He was waving farewell to a little girl in a fluffy pink winter coat and thick white corduroy pants. He could see she was fighting the flow of tears and a heavy heart. She waved back with a mittened hand. "Don't you cry," he called back to her. "I'll be back again someday." Now he had returned. Not that it mattered anymore. The little girl in the pink coat was surely a dead, frozen husk, like the rest of humanity, like the animals, like the plants and flowers, like every living thing on the planet, except for him. He walked through the dirty snowfall, stopping at the town square. Amidst the dead and discarded machinery of mankind stood the town's wilted Christmas tree, decked with bold ornaments and shimmering garland. Even though Christmas was just 2 days away, he did not feel celebratory. Every ounce of Christmas spirit drained from him the moment Santa Claus died in his arms, somewhere within the harsh Canadian north, in a desolate igloo. The sole survivor of the earth began to weep. He knew his nemesis, the beast known as the sun, would not appear again for many, many decades. That is, he was lucky, or fate was merciful. The golem of snow, once called Frosty, continued walking without destination. Black tears flowed unchecked from his eyes made of coal, and his tears were cold, bitterly so, unquote. Yeah, I guess I kinda gave away the ending to that one with my whole beginning preamble, huh? You know, as silly as it is to write a story about Frosty the Snowman being the sole survivor in a nuclear winter, I've gotta commend the effort. It's very well written. It's played straight, and overall, it's not bad. I mean, it is a little bit funny, you know? All this lovely prose and dark themes centered around Frosty the fucking Snowman, but somehow I don't think that that's lost on the author. And I have a feeling they changed the name from Frosty the Snowman to the Sole Survivor as to better have this surprise ending, since they never actually mention that we're talking about a snowman or Frosty the Snowman until the very end of the story. But anywho, what's next? Substitute. Created by YouTuber IcyPie, who also created another popular creepypasta that we're going to get to in a moment, Substitute follows Clyde, a high school student who recounts his strange experience with a substitute teacher who made him question his entire reality. You see, the teacher asks his students questions like, what is the sun made up of? Or glass? Or a pencil? Do they believe in God, etc.? Which eventually leads to the teacher telling them nothing really exists, that all of reality is an illusion, and furthermore, he seems to be here with the sole purpose of proving just that to them. Now, the story itself, I will admit, sort of plays its cards a little too early. There are some interesting twists and turns this story takes, but a fair bit of the time I was waiting for some kind of shocking reveal, a gotcha moment that the story felt like it was building up to, but alas, nothing like that really happens. So we're kind of left with a well-written but kind of dry story in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I do think that for what it is, the story really did keep me engaged the whole way through, but I feel like it left no lasting impact on me personally. The guy says that reality is an illusion, and then we find out and see evidence towards this being the case, and he just keeps saying reality is an illusion, and our protagonist is like, no it's not, and he's like, yes it is, and it doesn't really go anywhere, but still, not too bad. We Deleted You. Created by YouTuber IcyPie, this is, surprisingly enough, one of the highest profile creepypastas we have covered yet, with a 3.5-hour animatic series made by The Masked Chris, with over 5 million views on YouTube to go along with this one. To say that this one is popular will be underselling it. Frankly, this one's in a league of its own these days. So then, with all this popularity, the question must be asked, is it any good? Well, it's alright. The story starts off as a little kid getting a brand new Nintendo Wii 9 days after its release date, and going to the Me channel only to find that there's a Me already made there, with big round eyes, a bald head, a big old grin, and the name Edeled, or delete backwards. Our protagonist can't seem to delete the Me no matter what he does, and eventually the Me talks to him in a low-pitched voice, asking him why he wants to delete him so badly. This eventually leads to Hell.EXE taking his anger out on our protagonist's own me, chopping him up into pieces, something which greatly disturbs our protag. Later on, it's revealed that when a me gets deleted, it gets sent to this hospital of sorts, where they live out the rest of their time until they die for good. And Hell.EXE knows how to escape this place, but it pains him terribly every time he goes back there. Something which he reveals to our protagonist sometime later in an attempt to have him understand why it's bad to delete me's, and why he got so angry earlier. It is then later revealed that Hell.EXE is actually not a me. He has a bit of a backstory part, where it turns out that he's actually the soul of a lonely man who worked at Nintendo by the name of Henry, who died while making this me in an electrocution accident. And yeah, if you want to know more, I suppose you can go watch the full animatic. For what it's worth, I do think it's well put together and somewhat engaging as a story, but, and I really hate to say this, I just could not for the life of me take this story seriously whatsoever. And I found at several points, it just had strange leaps of logic, to have characters act in ways that seemed either overdramatic or outright dumb for the sake of keeping the story going. It's also just not very scary. Like, the characters at several points act like Hell.EXE killing another me as some sort of traumatizing or scary event, but he's no actual danger to anyone in real life, and the other me's aren't real. He's the only one with a soul, so I mean, it should, in theory, be just as traumatic as seeing anyone else play a video game killing random characters, right? It's just not scary. I also feel like the story at the last second creates a new villain out of fucking nowhere, and so much of the story's core beats and ideas are repeated time and time and time again. Like, take a drink every time somebody says, Hell.EXE, why, that's delete backwards. I swear to God, they said that so many fucking times in the story that I actually started thinking, wait a minute, is it actually going to be revealed that it means something else? Like it's an anagram for something else and not that? Because everyone fucking brings it up every single fucking time the character's introduced to anybody. But no, it's just delete backwards because I guess he doesn't want to get deleted or something. Also, later on, the cursed Nintendo Wii changes hands to like this girl who's like, I'm not a typical girl, I'm a gamer girl, I have you know, and I am different from the people and girls that go shopping and stuff. I only play video games. It's one of those types of characters, and the whole thing's just very cringy to me. And the original owner of the Wii, the guy, you know, who was like, he was a kid and he got scared of the Wii, he wants his old Wii back from this new girl because he wants to destroy the Wii so that Hell.EXE can be destroyed, and we're never given a reason as to why he wants to do that, because he already knows that, like, doing so will just, I guess, take out the soul of the guy that was in there, but he can't do anything, and he hasn't done anything to him other than be a scary character on the screen. And so I kept thinking, oh, well, there's a time skip, right, between whenever the Wii moved hands, and I thought maybe the Wii had some kind of thing where it, like, killed his whole family, something, like, it did something, and now this kid's out for revenge on it, but that wasn't the case, and it's never explained why he's so adamant about destroying this Wii that has this me on it, that has the soul of a guy named Henry in there. None of it makes any fucking sense. And then later I found out that part of the reason this whole creepypasta is so popular to begin with is because there's a Friday Night Funkin' mod of it, which also contributed to the revival and repopularization of Sonic.exe, along with several other creepypasta characters. I don't know what happened, really. I mean, I guess what happened is Friday Night Funkin' is really popular, but every creepypasta character, like, over the course of the last year or so, has gotten repopular all over again, thanks to being mods within Friday Night Funkin'. It's an interesting way of all these stories to be revived yet again, and it's kind of funny, you know, coming from me, being someone who grew up with all these back whenever they were first created and, you know, were come up with, and seeing the new generation discover them through, frankly, a bit of an unlikely place. But hey, whatever. That being said, We Deleted You is still, like, leaps and bounds more popular than quite a few of these other things. In fact, they even had a plushie dedicated to it fairly recently. No hate, of course. It's clear that this was a passion product that these lads very much put a lot of time and effort into making, that plenty very much enjoy. So if you're one of those people that do happen to enjoy the story, more power to you, but it just didn't do anything for me. SpongeBob Hope is Lost. This pasta is literally just Squidward's Sussy Sussy, but with an extra overdramatic narrator. Like, legit, it follows the exact structure of that creepypasta to a T, with it following an intern who works at Nickelodeon and he stumbles into a room he's not supposed to, only to find a monitor with a video, a SpongeBob episode which seems to be titled You Shouldn't Have Been a Nosy Intern, like that's literally the title of it, and the episode sees SpongeBob sacrificing Patrick to the devil, and the whole thing is super over the top and edgy, all while our intern protagonist cries and screams to the sight of SpongeBob characters being killed, as he is sure by episode's end that God has abandoned us because of a SpongeBob episode. Yeah, very original. At any rate, that's pretty much it. It's hot fucking garbage. So, moving on. Oh shit. Looks like the maze has changed. I don't know about you, but to me it looks like we're on the misty roads of Silent Hill, and we've angered a few protectors of the center. I can hear them scuttering about. Stay low. Use the fog to our advantage. And whatever you do, don't let them touch you. I tried to submit this pasta to the Creepypasta wiki, but it was rejected, and it made me sad because it was an okay pasta. Quote, June 27th, 2093. The bombings keep coming. It seems like they come every minute now, every second. I guess the EWU is picking up the pace. The hospital is getting busier and busier. More patients are getting the disease. Further testing is required. The radiation treatment centers are becoming full. Only elderly, young, and women are permitted. June 28th, 2093. The EWU attacked the hospital today. They killed a young nurse and a 27-year-old female patient. They infected 3 more with the disease. The usual symptoms of vomit and organ rot have shown in the patients. I've heard that President Catherine Withers may be surrendering to the EWU. This would make things a whole lot easier. June 29th, 2093. She tried to make peace, but it failed. Withers declared all the women between the ages of 15 to 55 must join the armed forces. This exempts medical and other essential personnel. Meanwhile, almost half the people in the hospital have the disease. I am now required to live in the hospital. It is too dangerous to go outside. Who knows what could be out there. June 30th, 2093. The military is now guarding the hospital. It sounds like there are people trying to break in. President Withers was assassinated today. Almost 75% of the patients have the disease. We are now asked to wear disease-resistant suits. June 31st, 2093. The EWU army broke in again. Most of the medical staff was killed, but I managed to survive. The patients were left unarmed. 147 of my patients have their organs completely rotted out. Following autopsy, there was no organ matter left in the body. July 1st, 2093. All the patients have died of the disease. Vice President Jones has declared a national emergency. The radiation is really bad. I am showing symptoms of radiation poisoning, and I expect to live only one more week. The hospital was almost completely destroyed by another bomb. July 3rd, 2093. I spent the last day sleeping. The radiation sickness is taking a toll on me. One of the creatures escaped the lab room. I completely forgot about them. It killed a male doctor and a female assistant. The creature was instantly killed by me. I have heard that Vice President Jones will give the Federated Republic of America to the EWU. July 4th, 2093. The country's birthday is now also his death day. I can feel my eyes becoming heavy. A loud explosion just went off outside the hospital. I can feel the collapse of the building. I don't think I will make ineligible. Oh my god! Oh my god! The creature! Ineligible. Bleeding out! Ineligible. Deformed man! Ineligible. The end. Honestly, I was expecting that creepypasta to be way worse based on the title. But, I mean, yeah. It's nothing all that significant, but whatever. It's okay. Ending's pretty dumb, though. $1.WAV. So this pasta starts off strong, and then over the course of a few minutes turns into absolute brain mush. It starts like this. Quote, after my computer got burnt to a crisp in a lightning storm, I was left with only my old computer. Fortunately, I had everything from my destroyed computer already backed up onto USB drives and CD-ROMs. My old computer was running Windows 98 and desperately needed an OS upgrade. It was time to search online for a new OS install disk that was at an affordable price. You might ask, why not just get a new computer? I would have, but because of the crappy economy, I didn't have the money to do so. So my only other option was to upgrade my old one. Anyways, I searched around on eBay to see if anybody was selling a copy of Windows XP at an affordable price. There was no way my computer would be able to handle Windows Vista or 7, so I'll just have to go with XP. Lo and behold, somebody was selling a full Windows XP clean install disk for only $1.45. Nobody else was bidding on it, so I placed mine. Even after I had placed my bid, nobody else did. And needless to say, I won the disc, with nobody else challenging me. A few days later, I received the disc in a white envelope. I opened the envelope and pulled out the disc. It seemed like any other XP bootable disc. I turned on my old computer and popped it in, and installed Windows XP as one normally would. While I waited for it to install, I popped some popcorn, took a dump, and watched some television, occasionally checking on the progress of the installation and responding to dialog boxes, entering the registration code, etc. Finally, it finished installing and I could use the computer. First thing I did was transfer everything I had backed up from my destroyed computer onto the old computer. CD after CD, USB drive after USB drive, and finally I got everything onto my computer the way I wanted it. I decided to randomly browse around the computer a little while before I turned it off to get ready to go to bed. This random browsing led me to the C Windows/media folder. Then I noticed a file in there called $1.WAV. I didn't put the file on the computer, so I assumed it was installed along with all the other files in the folder. But I realized I didn't remember any such file ever being included with XP when I had it on my destroyed computer, before I upgraded it to Windows 7. Curious, I double-clicked the file to open it. It was a very peculiar file. All I heard when I opened it was some weird static noise, almost as if it was some extremely distorted song. The file was just 4 solid minutes of this weird sound. It kind of creeped me out. I mean, it was nighttime, with my sleeping dog being my only company, and I find a file on my computer that I never put there, and wasn't part of the original XP installation. And all of it is 4 minutes of weird static noise. Furthermore, it's in a system folder. Thinking it might be a virus of some sort, I scanned the file. Behold, one Trojan came up. I had no clue where I would have gotten it from. I'd barely been on the internet at all since Windows XP was fully installed. Suddenly I realized I'd seen a file with that same name flash for a split second on the screen as the disk installed all the system files. I could only come to one conclusion. The disk had been tampered with. I decided to delete the Trojan, delete $1.WAV, and do a full system scan with both of my antivirus programs, It was going to take a crapload of time to finish scanning, so I decided to go to bed while I waited. I still felt a bit mad that I went through all the time to finally get my computer set up and upgrade the way I wanted it, only to find out the install disk had been tampered with. I woke up the next morning, ate my breakfast, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went into my computer room. I sat down at my computer and turned on the monitor, which I had turned off the last night before I went to bed. I couldn't believe what I saw. My desktop background had been changed to a picture of a dollar bill. There were 2 errors saying that my 2 antiviruses had crashed, along with a bunch of other blank error dialogues that were titled $1.WAV with a single OK button. Every icon on my desktop had been replaced with a shortcut to $1.WAV, even the recycle bin. My start button now said $1.WAV, and the usual flag icon was replaced with a $1 sign. When I clicked the start button, or in this case the $1.WAV button, to bring up the $1.WAV menu, every icon there was also replaced with $1.WAV. The administrator name was changed to $1.WAV. God, how many fucking times am I gonna have to say that? And the account picture was that of a dollar bill. I clicked Don't Send Report to both the errors, saying Malwarebytes and Microsoft Security Essentials had crashed. I then clicked the OK button on each $1.WAV error box. Okay, the screen was cleared of all those windows now. I tried to reopen my antivirus programs, but they both gave me a blank error titled $1.WAV. I clicked OK on those. I went to the $1.WAV menu and clicked Shut Down, but I just got the familiar clunk error sound. I tried the power button, nothing happened. Finally, I just unplugged the computer and it finally shut off. I plugged it back in, booted it up in safe mode, and tried opening the antivirus programs there, but when I did, my computer made the weirdest noise ever and abruptly powered off. I tried pressing the power button, but nothing happened. It didn't even whir up. That freaking virus had completely destroyed my only remaining computer, and I hadn't even got it from a website or anything. It had come from my operating system. Well, that was that. I had to go get some things at the grocery store, so I left my house along with my dog. I have yet to earn enough money to buy myself a new computer. I do everything computer related on my friend's laptop that he generously let me borrow when I need to check my email, do something on my bank account online, etc. I have used that same laptop to type up and publish this story onto the internet, along with $1.WAV, which I have gone through and manually removed the malicious coding from, after a certain cryptic message I read talking about some last evidence that will be destroyed if I share it with anybody, which you will read about in just a moment. I've decided to research as thoroughly as I can about the mysterious $1.WAV until I have figured out the sinister mystery that surrounds it. How did I get back $1.WAV after my computer was destroyed, you ask? Well, when I go home, my dog's ears perked up and she began growling menacingly. She followed the scent into the computer room. Everything seemed normal. However, when I looked where my second destroyed computer was, it wasn't there. Everything else was still there, but my computer was gone. I thought of a robbery, but who would want an old computer that doesn't even boot up anymore? I also noticed the tampered with XP installed disk I had gotten off of eBay was missing as well. In its place was a different disc. It was a white CD-ROM with something written on it in green Sharpie. I picked up the disc and read, "This is the last remaining evidence that I know of. Keep it secret, or I'll have to destroy it too." I glanced down at the table the disc had been sitting on. Where it had been was a single dollar bill. It wasn't crinkled or damaged in any way, unlike most dollar bills. It was in absolutely perfect condition, as if it had just been made. I took the disc and the dollar over to my friend's house, the one that has the laptop that I'm typing these words on. I explained how both my computers were destroyed and he agreed to let me borrow it whenever I needed to. So I got on the laptop and put the CD in. On the CD was just one file, $1.WAV, unquote. He also provided with the story a sound file with the fabled horror audio on it, which I'll play a few seconds of for you here. Now, in of itself, this is an alright setup for a story. And right after this, the next entry in our story sees our narrator trying to find information about the virus online, which leads him to a message board where the fucking stars align and somebody else also has a story about the exact same file destroying their PC as well. And they just so happen to have gotten their PC OS with said file from the exact same seller, the exact same house, etc. Also, a little note beforehand, him putting this disc on his friend's computer to show the sound file, kind of a weird thing to do. It seems like that would have definitely destroyed his friend's computer, and that would be a bad idea. I just wanted to note that as well. I didn't miss that, just was waiting to bring it up. So, all this is a bit silly. But then, when our narrator actually goes to investigate the seller's house and asks them why they sold them this fucking Windows XP with a virus on it, it turns out to be an old woman who the narrator describes as follows. Quote, "A woman almost instantly answered the door. She seemed to be an elderly woman, short and stout with white hair tied up in a bun. Then I looked into her eyes. Oh, those eyes! They seeped through me and into my soul, hungrily examining it, seeing if it was suitable to feast upon. I almost sprinted back to my car and drove off right then and there, but I couldn't. I had a mystery to solve." "Why, hello, John Goodman," said the woman in a menacing tone that sent shivers down my spine. My first thought, oh dear, she knows my name. Oh God, please help me. My dog growled threateningly at the woman. It took all of my courage to finally sputter out, "Look, I don't have time for fooling around. What is this $1 and why did you put it on my Windows XP install disk?" "Oh, I can't tell you that," cackled the woman, whom I was now certain was no good. "Why not?" I countered angrily. "Because," said the evil woman. "However, I can tell you this. Be wary in the days that follow, for $1 will haunt you until all is hollow." And before I could say another word, the woman shut the door on me, cackling wickedly. I had no other choice but to walk back to the car, unquote. Well, as it turns out, on the way to his car, he talks to the next door neighbor, where the following exchange happens. "What were you doing over there?" "I was talking to the woman that lives in the house over there," I replied. The man's expression became concerned. "Nobody's lived in that house for over 10 years. I looked at the house, but instead of the bright yellow cheery house that I had just seen when I arrived there, there was a crumbling abandoned foundation with a wooden plank nailed to the front door saying condemned in green letters." But I was just talking to an elderly woman that lived there a minute ago," I argued. All the color drained from the man's face. "Elderly woman?" "Yes," I said, "you know, with her hair all tied up in a bun and whatnot." "The last person who lived there was an elderly woman, always having her hair tied up in a bun. But she's dead." So I didn't actually find out much of anything new about $.wave, but apparently it was created by a ghost. Interesting. But this is no laughing matter. I realized that the moment I saw that dang woman out of the corner of my eye, giving me that freaking soul-devouring stare and smiling like a maniac. When I focused on her, she disappeared. I then proceeded to sprint out of the room and hide under the blanket for the rest of the night. When I dared go back into the living room, a dollar bill lay on the floor where the woman had been, unquote. So, this went from a virus story to a ghost story in a matter of no time. But what makes this even more strange is others seem to be able to see the fucking ghost lady as well. And later, when they have a confrontation with the ghost lady, the guy's dog bites and kills her, which is, I thought she was a ghost. How the fuck did the dog do that? There's also something about a curse with the dollar bill that the old lady says is the curse of greed, and that burning all the money she ends up placing in his living room is the only way to fully get rid of the curse, which our narrator does without question, and yeah, this whole story sort of just goes nowhere for a solid 20 minutes, and then ends anticlimactically. The end. I chose the blue pill. So these next two entries are requests from my Arch Owl patron, Just Us. So this creepypasta is about a man at the end of his rope. His life in shambles, depressed beyond belief, and currently existing in his own self-made mud pit of agony and self-hatred. And it is in this state when he comes across an ad. Quote, "Do you feel like everything is hopeless? Do you feel like the drones around you can't help you? Do you need a way out that's different? Click here to find out more." In my mind, I immediately answered yes to all three. Those questions perfectly hit the nail on the head, describing how I felt. For long, I was given a number to call to arrange a home visit. In the call, I told them all of my problems and how I felt, adding the caveat that I felt too different for any ordinary service to help. They seemed to be interested in my case and gave me a date for a visit a week on Friday. The time couldn't come any faster. I found myself practically counting the time away for that home visit. This was it, I thought to myself. This was what was going to be the beginning to the rest of my life. Friday rolled around and I made sure I was doing nothing. I didn't start any games. I cleared up a spot on my otherwise messy house for us to talk. I even laid out some snacks. When the guy showed up, he wasn't what I was expecting at all. He was a very serious looking man, in an all black suit and tie, carrying a very formal briefcase. He looked like he should be bodyguarding someone of importance, not messing around with a slob like me. I offered him food and drink numerous times throughout the appointment. However, he denied each time. He was just here for business, and he was serious. The speech he gave me was astounding. He rattled on about how I was the driving force for everything that's happened in my life, that all the bad that's happened to me was either directly or indirectly due to decisions I've made throughout my life, that all my decisions has led up to this point, how my future decisions will either pull me out or keep me going on this downward path. I was taken aback by how mind-blowing all of this was to hear, and it was all true. I often felt like a mess, yet I kept my house messy, which reinforced that ideal. I felt horrible when wasting time, yet I purposely chose to waste the free time I had. I was always tired, and yet I chose to stay up late all night. I barely get any sleep before work. I really was the primary reason for everything wrong in my life. This was all perfect and everything I needed, until the last point. He started to go on about one last decision I had to make. This is when he pulled out his briefcase, something which he hadn't drawn attention to at any other point prior. He opened it up on my just about cleared coffee table and turned it around. In the case were 2 pills, each on a soft bed. They almost glowed in the light with their glossy, opaque coat. I stared at them. One was the most intense, warm red I'd seen in person before, and the other was a cool, chilling blue. I stared at them in disbelief, furrowing my brow in anticipation of what this was all about. I had already half figured it out in my head. I mean, who hasn't seen The Matrix? I was more just curious about the direction he was going to take this. Your life is a series of decisions which has led you to this one key moment. Will you take the blue pill, see your life carry on as is? Or will you take the red pill and grasp the opportunity to end that cycle? He said all this with a straight face, so I reciprocated by taking it seriously, putting on a concentrating look while I eyed each option. My mind first came to the thought of the red pill. I mean, it sounds like the correct decision, right? This whole session was about making decisions to forward my life, and to stop choosing to be stagnant. But then reality kicked in. If there's something I've learned from failed diets and life-changing schemes, it's that there is no fast fix in life. If you want to lose weight, you have to work hard with a diet and exercise. If you want to get rich, you can't just magic opportunities. You have to be proactive. And I figured that this was the moral of the session. I'll take the blue pill, I retorted. This was the first time I saw him react, and his serious guise was briefly dropped when he took in what I said. Are you sure? I've sat here telling you that to take control of your life, you have to make proactive decisions, he said, trying to sound persuasive. However, no matter how persuasive he was, had it all figured out in my head. No, I'll take the blue pill. I know I have to make good decisions from now on, which I will do, but I also know that there is no magic fixes in life. Right now, I'm making the first big decision for my new life. I'm choosing to take the hard way so I can grow. At first he scowled a bit, but then he smirked and left me with one last remark. Okay, you have made your decision. He handed me the blue pill as he carried on. However, I will leave you with the red pill. If you ever feel like you need an escape, this is always an option. And with that, he left. I took the blue pill and swallowed it with the dregs of coffee I had left, smiled, and had a new outlook in life. From here, everything went uphill, unquote. And so it did. And while it took a very long time, and he had his relapses, eventually, come a few years, our narrator was doing much better for himself, improving his life in small ways until all those little things built the foundation for the rest of his wonderful life. He always kept the red pill as a reminder of the revelation he had that day, and that no matter what rock bottom he falls to, he chose and chooses to stand back up and try again, rather than take the easy way out. Well, later on, our narrator realizes that he had never thanked the man who helped to improve his life, and so he wanted to try and contact him again. But it seemed like the website, the phone number, everything about that place and its mysterious suited man was gone from the internet. And it was then he Googled the company, and something rather disturbing is revealed. Quote, as I searched, the first few links were to major headlines on news websites. My heart sank as I clicked on one of them. The article went into detail about the group that ran the service, how they were fanatics dedicated to mass murder, and how they had persuaded many people in similar situations as me to exit the game of life. At first I thought it might have been a different group under the same name, an easy alibi as things like that have happened before. I made every excuse under the sun to deny their involvement until I saw how they did it. First, they would find people who were at a low point in their life. Then they would offer them a choice. A blue pill, which was just a simple placebo, or a red pill, which was filled with a lethal dose of cyanide, which, if ingested, would result in a person's death within mere minutes. My stomach sank reading this. It went on to say there were no survivors, that everyone involved were either arrested or found dead on scene, having taken one of the red pills themselves. This was contradictory, as I am living proof that there was a survivor, not that they could ever find out, since they never kept a strong paper trail. I was in shock. Everything I based my life around was, in a way, a lie. They weren't a help group. They were just a bunch of mugs lusting for murder. A murder cult which took advantage of people in a dark point in their lives. A concept that helped push me to where I am today. I had to take a break from my computer, so I went to my room to sit on my bed and look at the red pill, my prized possession, now a symbol of death. But that's when I had an epiphany. The red pill had always represented an easy way out, an option that was always there, yet one that never truly fixed any problems. It always represented exit the game of life, a message which they believe was the perfect solution. However, to me it's a misguided message. Exiting the game of life is always an option. However, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. The blue pill represented nothing. The choice to have no magic fix intervene in your problems, but the choice to take them on yourself. A message which was not lost on me. In the end, I made the decision to stop thinking about whether they really were some sick, twisted help group with a good message, or a bunch of savages, because to me, in a way, it didn't matter. What they did for me was the best thing that ever happened, and the message, though now more morbid, had never really changed. To make sure it couldn't hurt anyone, I took the red pill out of its easily opened box and put it in a sealed, clear frame and hung it on the wall. I still tell the story of what it means. However, I always leave out the last part of its true origin, unquote. And that's the story. And I would say overall, it's quite a good story. It's simple, but extremely effective. And the twist is, well done, I'd say overall. And I do really like the positive message that it has. Something which you don't often find in creepypastas, to be quite honest. Overall, one of the better ones that I've read. Little Black Bugs. Written by rather popular creepypasta / just general horror author Vincent V. Cava, Little Black Bugs is an interesting psychological horror story about two opposites. You see, our protagonist is a neat and tidy sort of guy. He likes keeping things extra clean and abhors anything that gets in the way of that. And unfortunately for him, he's living with his older brother, who is, by contrast, in a constant state of slobbery. He stinks, eats food, gets high, and jerks off all over the fucking place apparently. He's got zero aspirations. His dorm room smells and looks like shit, and he's just the kind of guy who simply exists in filth without a care in the world. Once again, by contrast, our protagonist strives for good grades and has the tendency to think about everything and everyone. He cares about his image and tends to even overthink it at points, which makes having to live with his brother in his college dorm because of their parents only being able to afford one rooming situation type thing is in a constant state of anger, stress, and depression over having to live in such a situation. He is constantly cleaning up after his slob of a brother, and he's becoming a bit of a social recluse because of it, because he's too afraid and too embarrassed to invite anyone over to their dorm, which makes keeping friends and dating a complete no-go for the guy. However, eventually things come to a head when the girl of his dreams, who he's been interacting with and thinking of a way to spend more time with her for some time, ends up going with a completely different guy. All because he was too afraid to make a move. Not out of lack for confidence, but because he didn't want her to see the filth that he lived in. When a protagonist tries to swallow his anger and clean up yet another mess by his brother, he sees a swarm of little black bugs crawling in and out of a pizza box left on the floor. In this abyss of black creepy crawlies, something snaps in our protagonist. He begins to think of a solution to his problem, a way to clean the dorm forever, to get rid of his problem, and this eventually leads him to the idea of taking care of his brother permanently. So he comes up with a plan to kill his brother, and it's a pretty simple one, relatively speaking I suppose. Strangle him when he's high watching TV on the couch, and then cut off all of his fingers and pull out his teeth, drive him to the lake house their family owned, toss him into the river with weights and such, and then park the car he used at some local fast food joint, cleaning every single spot meticulously, as he always does of course, and then report his car and his brother missing to the police to help in his image. He had everything planned, and he ensures to the audience that he is in fact of sound mind, and that he knew that this was the only true and permanent solution to his problem. And so he does end up killing his brother, and all seems to be going according to plan up until he brought the body to the lake house, where he'd start pulling out the teeth and what have you. It's then that something strange happens. The dead body starts moving, convulsing, a loud hissing sound emanating from it. And then a swarm of black bugs start swarming out of the body, crawling every which way, and one even crawls up and down our protagonist's back and bites his neck. While he is eventually able to get rid of the body, after the experience of such a terrible horror, things in his life seem to be spiraling out of control. In fact, he starts having dreams and hallucinations about his brother and the bugs. People seem to stare at him with an ugly contempt, and the little black bugs are appearing everywhere in his dorm room. And no matter what he tries, they never seem to be gotten rid of. It's all starting to drive our protagonist mad. And while I am skipping ahead a fair bit here, there's a lot of good psychological horror in this one, so I'd recommend it. It all ends with our protagonist deciding to light the dorm on fire, killing the bugs once and for all, which they do end up stopping him from doing by forming together into a strange humanoid shape and then knocking him out before then crawling into every single hole he has on his body and filling him up completely with their collective. They seem to want him to be like his brother, to be a slob, to feed them garbage, to be their giving, loving, filthy god. But our protagonist, even in his immense suffering, refuses to be like his brother, and so he finds the will to light the dorm on fire and then shoots himself. The fire killing 6 others in the dorm, and his legacy being the strange recluse that always brought cleaning supplies to his room and complained about his brother. Oh, and the murderer, of course. That's the story, and honestly, I really like this one, primarily because the protagonist is very interesting. He's a guy who you sort of feel bad for at the start, for living in a embarrassing situation that's clearly out of his control. But slowly but surely, he starts showing his true, rather sick mindset with how he views the world, others, and himself. And you kind of root for his downfall, at least for me personally at some point. He made for an interesting character to follow as he tries to pull off this scheme of his, and how the little black bugs, or perhaps his own mind, undoes him in the end. There's a gigantic spider in my basement. This one was suggested to me by a good friend of mine on Discord, and follows a man in a rather unfortunate position. See, his marriage is falling apart. It seems like his wife and kid are going to be moving out of his life, leaving him alone and wondering where his life has been going the last several years. But that's all secondary. The main issue he's having is within his basement. You see, there's a giant, kitten-sized spider down there, along with quite a few other smaller spiders, and ugly little creatures. This fact not only is making him scared to walk around his own house, but it seems to be taking a psychological toll on him, as he seems to pay little attention to his crumbling family, and is instead focused on this damn spider, hoping and praying with each passing step he doesn't find it crawling up his leg, or biting him. This story is pretty straightforward and is essentially about a rather strange man and his extreme arachnophobia. There's a few twists and turns here and there, but overall the protagonist's narration and the almost dark comedic tone makes it an interesting read. There could also be some kind of symbolism in there about the man ignoring all his real-life problems in favor of this spider problem in his basement that he could totally be avoiding by just not going down in his fucking basement. But it's kind of unclear if that is intentional or not. But either way, not bad. My brother died when I was a child, he kept talking. So this is one of those creepypastas that stuck with me quite a while after reading it, mainly because of how unrelentingly grim and haunting it is. As the title implies, the story is about our protagonist's brother dying. See, he was fighting cancer since he was about 10 years old, and, well, it finally caught up with him. The family obviously being in a terrible state of despair, and their family truly in shambles as the young man passed away in his hospital bed. But then, something strange happens. He begins to talk, specifically calling out to his brother. The doctors try their best to figure out how this is possible, but in truth he is dead, stone cold to the touch. But something, somewhere, is giving him the ability to talk. Though everyone can hear him speaking, only his brother's voice can get back through to him. Perhaps because the two of them were twins, but no one knows for sure. A strange man eventually walks into the room and talks with our protagonist, asking him questions and telling him that the moon landing was so significant, not as much because a man stepped on the moon, but because we could speak to him. We could communicate with the brave souls who were traversing the black abyss of the great unknown, and that he was akin to Houston in this case. He should ask his brother questions of what he's seeing, of what comes after death. So, he does. He talks with his brother, but there is something strange about him. He's not quite like how he was when he was alive. He talks as if he's much older. He seems to have a lot of knowledge on a great many things, like the afterlife came naturally to him, as if this knowledge was innate. But the thing is, while you might be expecting something sad, but maybe a little uplifting, this story takes a rather dark turn when the afterlife is a terrible place full of nothing but gray and others, walking towards the center of an unbelievably large landmass of sand. People are naked, and you can see right through them. Not just physically, but emotionally and historically, their life story being displayed around them like wandering ghosts. There are creatures that like to feed on your negative emotions, and there is so much suffering. People crying out in anger and desperation about how they died, or how someone killed them, and why none of this is fair. It's endless suffering on a mass scale. and even the alluring power of the center brings no hope of anything good, but rather simply a goal in this endless abyss. All of this is a lot to bear and makes what is already a terrible event, having his own brother die in front of him, all the worse as he cries out in desperation, wishing and guiding his brother in any way he can, hoping that his suffering will end, but it only gets worse. There are moments where mere minutes of silence between the brother in our time pass like years in the afterlife. As at one point our protagonist doesn't know what to say, and then when he calls out to his brother to ask where he is now after the moment of silence, it's been years, and his brother is so happy to hear from him again. All of this ends with the deceased brother finally making it to the center, only to find that it's a monster that is truly indescribable. He thinks it might be the devil, but eventually he comes to believe that it's God, and being around it brings so much bitterness and anger and pain. It's like feeling all the sins and hurt of everyone in the world who has died, crushing the spirit over and over again. His deceased brother's last words, before he embraces the center, is pleading for his brother to please never die. And that was it. Our protagonist left to suffer with the knowledge of the terrible truth about what comes after death, and that his brother, his twin, his second half, someone who he loved dearly, was suffering forever while he lived. Many years later pass, and our protagonist begins having vivid dreams about his brother, and the thing, the god he so desperately tried to describe, and how he feels like it's an omen for something terrible coming. And that's the story. And this was honestly one of those stories that kept me engaged the whole way through. The descriptions of this strange and terrible version of the afterlife, the emotions at play between the characters, and the terrible feeling the story left me with, hoping desperately for something good to come, some light at the end of this grim dark tunnel, that it would somehow end on a positive note. However, that unfortunately never came. It's a very well written story that invites you to endure its depressing tale, and leaves you with several questions as well. Overall, it's a pretty damn good pasta, and one that I don't ever really see people recommend either. So, take it from me. While I'm definitely one for happy endings, and that's always definitely more my cup of tea, personally, for what it is, this is a very well written and very creative story. It just so happens to be a rather depressing and dark one at that. 1 Million Visitor, yet another very obscure one, with good old Dave the Useless being the only guy to have read this one. And it's really fucking dumb. Like, the story opens like this. Quote, I believed myself to be very dull until I linked up my account to a website called 1000000.icu, unquote. Really? ICU? Anyway, the website says it can give him 1 million viewers, and sort of works like one of those AI websites. Though if you ask it almost anything, it just says, I am 1 in 1 million. So he uploads a YouTube video, and sure enough, he gets crazy amounts of views on it, with a ton of weird comments to boot. And then, after he gets a ton of views and he goes to thank the website bot, I guess, it's now been replaced with this video of an eye with like a one-shaped pupil, which scares the guy, and so he deletes his stuff, I guess, and something bad is gonna happen when he reaches 1 million viewers or something. I don't fucking know. It's kind of unintelligible near the end, and ends very abruptly without any clear conclusion. So, yeah, diamond in the rough, obviously. This is not. The Disappearance of Ashley Morgan. Not to be confused with the disappearance of Ashley, Kansas, this follows two twin sisters who were very close and always getting up to all sorts of mischief. However, very recently, their dog Rocky had passed away, something which their parents used as an opportunity to teach the two of them about death. They were only 6, but this memory stayed with them for some time, until one day after the family had a little pool party, the two of them were put to bed early, despite not being tired, and out of anger, the two decided to pull a little prank on their mom by dressing in each other's clothes and pretending to be the other twin for a bit to confuse and mess with her, something that they did fairly often. However, as the two fell asleep, that was the last time our narrator ever saw her twin sister. What proceeds is a story of a family falling apart as they first try and find her, only for the realization that she is more than likely dead, beating down on them all. What makes it worse is, according to the father, their older brother had gone to Japan just before all this happened, and decided to stay there with a girl he met, meaning that there were now two people they were missing. This eventually leads to a lot of tension between the father and mother, with the mother accusing the father, or maybe the father's brother, of kidnapping / assaulting Ashley before killing her. But she has no real basis for this thought. However, this would eventually lead to their divorce, and our protagonist left with only her father, as her mother ended up moving in with some other man to shoot up heroin to run away from her pain. The father, meanwhile, grew more and more distant of his only daughter, staying in his study and eventually sealing up their pool and building a shack over it, and generally acting very strangely. Over time, our protagonist grows to resent her missing sister, how her running away left their family torn apart, how she left without even saying goodbye, and how her family now hated to even look at her, as she reminded them of the one that they lost, her dead sister. Like a ghost walking about, her visage brings them nothing but pain now. All this comes to a head when her father eventually exits the game of life via a gun. And when the police get involved, everything slowly gets revealed. The pool that was being sealed up had several dead bodies under it. One was their dog, one was the body of Ashley, and one was the body of her older brother, who she hadn't seen in years, who she thought was still in Japan all this time. She of course believes all this to be the fault of her father, since he was the one that hid and buried all this, hiding his secrets before ending his life out of guilt. So she had her father cremated and tossed his ashes across the road, him deserving no sort of sentimentalities in her mind. However, in one final twist, they did indeed find DNA, or, stuff on Ashley's body. But it wasn't her father's, it was her brother's. The way it seemed to go down is that very night after the two of them went to bed, their 18-year-old brother took Ashley and assaulted her, most likely accidentally killing her via strangulation. The father caught him in the act and proceeded to beat him to death. Now left with two dead bodies, he chose to hide them and not tell his daughter and mother, out of trying to keep some sort of hope alive or something like that. And that's pretty much the story. Very dark and twisted, but pretty decent overall. I will say though that the way the story sort of tries to redeem the father as this hero that sacrificed so much to carry the burden of this knowledge for himself, I thought was kind of fucked up and wrong. Like, he's not a hero. He killed his son out of passion for his son killing his daughter and then buried their bodies to hide the crimes. Yeah, I suppose you might say he was justified, but he should have called the police if he was really a hero, even if he killed his own son first. It's a weird tonal shift that I thought was kind of a fucked up message overall. But besides that, it's overall a pretty decent story. Upstairs. When I was a child, I lived in a rented 2-floor house. Both my parents worked, so I was often alone when I came home from school. One early evening when I came home, the house was still dark. I called out, "Mum?" and heard a voice say, "Yeah," from upstairs. I called my mum again, and again got the same, "Yeah," reply. I felt she was calling back to me and climbed up the stairs. When I reached the first floor, I called her once more, and the voice, "Yes," came from the furthest room. I felt both uneasy, but also felt a strong urge to see my mother, and started to walk towards the room. But just as I was about to open the door into the room, I heard the front door downstairs open and my mother come in, carrying a lot of shopping bags. "Sweetie, are you home?" my mother called in a cheery voice. Hearing her voice made me feel instantly better, and I turned back to go downstairs at once. But not before I had a quick glance towards the room. While I watched from the top of the stairs, the door to the room slowly opened a crack. For a brief moment, I saw something strange in there. A pale face staring at me. The Chanting in the Woods. This story is about a kid living with his dad in the woods alongside his little terrier dog named Cash, and everything seems to be going fine. Well, until him and Cash stumble into a strange part of the woods where little dolls with the clean polished animal skulls for heads are all strung up, alongside paintings on the trees depicting a half-man, half-goat thing. Something about that place felt terribly wrong, and his dog Cash immediately started barking and running out of the woods, leading our narrator out of there and away from that morbid place. When our narrator tries to tell his dad about all this, he says that it's probably just some teenagers doing some stupid stuff in the woods. This put our narrator's mind at ease, up until that very night when he started hearing chanting in the woods, chanting that went on for 5 hours straight. A terrible feeling of fear overcomes our protagonist. And of course, when he tells his dad in the morning, he has another excuse for why it's not something weird or scary. This goes on for a bit, as you might expect, up until he has to go to his mom's house for the weekend since, well, the two are divorced. And on his way to his mom's car, he sees a black van with 2 men standing near it. They are bald and wear oddly thin sunglasses, and he sees them staring at him before they talk to one another and then glare back at him, like they wanted him to know he's being watched. Once again, he tries to tell his mom all this, and it goes nowhere. And when he has to go back to his dad's house and eventually finds the right mind space to fall asleep, he's then awoken in the middle of the night by 2 men, one in particular wearing a goat skull as a mask. They turn to tell him what they want, holding his mouth tightly shut. Quote, "Scream and I will kill you," the voice whispered in my ear. My eyes couldn't, no, they wouldn't break away from that horrible person wearing the severed goat head as a mask. He was shirtless, wearing a necklace of what appeared to be bones. He was horribly emaciated, and there were markings all up and down his torso. In his right hand, he held a knife about the size of my forearm. His build wasn't like any knife I had ever seen. It took a step closer to me and pressed it up against my throat. The steel was bitterly cold, and the tip of the blade was sharper than anything I ever felt. It would take less than 4 ounces of pressure to open my throat, and they knew that I knew it. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even breathe. In its other hand, it held a basic candle. "Tomorrow," the thing said, his voice muffled by the lifeless dead goat mask, "you will exit your house at midnight. You will light this candle, place it on the ground in the center of your yard, and you will sit behind it, legs crossed, right foot on top of the left knee, and vice versa. If you don't do this," voice whispered in my ear, "the blood of your loved ones will be on your hands." The goat man quickly retrieved the blade from my neck. I don't remember what happened next. I remember waking up in my bed, panting and crying. My dad came in to see what was wrong with me, and when I told him, he told me it was just a nightmare. At this point, he sat me down at the end of my bed. He looked very wary, like he didn't want to say what he was about to say. He rubbed his eyes with his fists and wearily explained to me that this was all just me stressing out over the divorce, that maybe we should look into talking to a therapist about these voices and hallucinations I'm having, unquote. Well, skipping ahead, that night does indeed come, and outside of his window he sees several people in masks, cultists waiting for him to perform the ritual, but he was too scared. He couldn't find the strength to leave his bed with all their eyes upon him, and so the next morning came, only to find that his dog Cash was murdered and left on the side of the road. It was a painful thing to endure through, knowing full well that this was all his fault, and should he not do it the next night, the next victim would be his father. So the next night came, and our protagonist does the ritual, only to find something with beady green eyes staring at him. A goat man. A real goat man. A dark god of sorts that was ready to take him in the night. The light of his candle being the only thing keeping the goat man away from him, as the cultists watched in anticipation. However, he ends up going against the ritual and escapes the Goatman by the skin of his teeth, only to find that, of course, no one believes him yet again. In fact, he is taken into a therapist by his parents, who thought he was doing all this as a cry for help and not taking the divorce well. He ended up being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia disorder, being told he made all this up, that it was all in his head. Quote, "For a while, I believed everything they told me. The lies felt safe. The lies were comfortable. Several years later, they would tell me that I would have made a full recovery. It was an easy process since I never had another encounter again. At that point in time, I was so angry I just told them what they wanted to hear. When I became old enough, I severed all ties with my parents and moved out of the state. Once on my own, I looked into the town's archives and researched as much information as I could about the area when I was 9. The missing person report. The manhunt in those woods lasted several days, and all they found was one man. He was torn apart, his limbs removed, his organs missing. They found that he was wearing a peculiar mask, the head of a ram, but its innards were carefully carved and hollowed to fit over a human head. When they removed the helmet, they saw that he had died with an expression of absolute horror. I took pleasure in that. I would like to believe that these men were cultists, that they were attempting to appease some unseen, unnamed god, a god that absolutely should not have existed, a god that had no right to walk among men, and that during their attempt to appease it, I had botched their ritual by breaking an important piece of the process, the doll, and in their attempt to salvage it, they forced me into offering myself as a sacrifice. But its failure to do whatever it was going to do to me that night destroyed the whole operation. I would prefer to believe that in the name of vengeance, this angry thing turned on its own worshippers, killing them all and dragging them back to wherever it came from. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. There's just one thing I still couldn't figure out. Why is it that no matter where I go, when I'm all alone, in quiet places, in the dead of night, why can I still hear them chanting that unholy sermon that I heard so long ago in the woods when I was 9, unquote. And that's the story, and yet again, I think this one is pretty good. It is a bit cliche, and you kind of already know what's gonna happen. At least I did going into it, but it's still pretty good. The Strangers. So this is a very unique creepypasta, and one that is admittingly a bit hard to do justice here. But the basic premise is about a guy who has to ride the metro to get to work. And lately, he hasn't been taking his backpack to work, so that he might start looking more mature without a giant backpack slung over his shoulder, I guess. His iPod also stopped working, and so lately he has just been sitting there quietly on the train, watching people. He starts noticing people of all sorts and their habits. Notably, habits to avoid talking to other people, such as pretending to fall asleep, using their phone, reading a book, or fidgeting quietly while staring at the floor, never making eye contact with others. Everything seems normal, until he noticed a man sitting perfectly still, never speaking a word, never reacting to anything or anyone, just staring blankly at the wall. The more he watched him, the more something terribly off about the man started to show through. The uncanny valleyness of his expression, almost like he was trying to hide amongst the crowd, but also not? Eventually our narrator decides to stick around and watch the guy longer, find out where he gets off or what he does besides sit there blankly and doing nothing. He comes to find that the man continues to ride the train for hours, the entire day in fact, and even goes on to the terminal, where our narrator is hesitant to go since it's so far from his own house. But eventually he just can't stand it anymore. He needs to know what this man was, what his deal is, and so he decides to stay with him to the terminal. And, well, maybe it's best I leave the surprise for you to go read yourself. But needless to say, a harsh left turn is taken in the story, and a real clear sense of dread and helplessness is what I would say encapsulates the rest of the story, along with the payoff to this mystery being something quite unique at the very least. So if you really want to know what this story is all about, I'd really highly recommend going and checking it out for yourself. It's a pretty damn good creepypasta. Mario 1-111. Alright, it finally happened, folks. We reached a creepypasta that I have no fucking clue as to what it is. Or rather, where it is, I suppose. I have tried writing in every variation for this creepypasta title into Google, into YouTube, etc. But I just cannot seem to find this pasta anywhere. So, sorry, this one might be a little too obscure. Or maybe it was taken off the internet for some reason. Maybe it's one of those DeviantArt ones that often get lost to time when the author gets too embarrassed about it, when it gets some notoriety. But even then, if it got notoriety, someone surely would have read it on YouTube, right? But I see no evidence of this either. Maybe this was something that the actual Creepypasta Iceberg creator wrote and is lost to time there. I'll have to ask them. But I'm on a strict schedule to try to get this video out. So, as much as it pains me to say, I don't know what this one's about. But if you do happen to know what this story is, or find it in any capacity, please let me know in the comments down below. And if you could, try and provide me a link, and I'll include it in the director's cut of this whole series iceberg thing. But until then, let's move on. How Jeff Killed Christmas. Yes, this is real. So, let's have a read of the whole thing, shall we? Well, hello there, readers young and old. You're in for quite a treat, a true tale to behold. As you can see, with a title such as this, I will tell you a tale of how Jeff killed Christmas. It all started late on a silent Christmas Eve, and our favorite killer Jeff had something up his sleeve. Seeing that it was Christmas, Jeff wanted to do something new, something extra, but what was he to do? Just then he heard something. His feet made him pause. He slowly turned to see a fake, drunken Santa Claus. The wheels started turning, and Jeff had a plan. He clutched the knife in his pocket, and that's when he began. Old Saint Nick saw Jeff heading straight his way. Maybe he could get $1 from Mr. Jeff today. Hey buddy, wanna help out? Now don't go being cheap. Jeff lunged at the man, saying, "Go to sleep." He slit Santa's throat while he squirmed and thrashed. But there was no escaping, being cut and being slashed. The drunk fell to the ground with a noticeable thud. His pupils started to widen as he choked on his blood. Jeff grabbed Santa's suit, soaked with crimson water. That's when he knew he could start his Christmas slaughter. When he achieved his look, he was on his way, but not before he hijacked Santa's car, his sleigh. He drove through a small neighborhood, rather quiet and kind, the perfect setting for what Jeff was planning in his mind. His plan was to sneak into each home, all of the parents he'd kill, murdering almost the whole neighborhood to get his holiday thrill. Jeff chuckled maniacally, stopping at the first house on the block, at how upset this town would be. Boy, would they be in for a shock. He could just imagine it. All the children on Christmas Day, to see that Mommy and Daddy were some twisted psycho's prey. He got out of the car and trudged through the snow, then scaled the side of a house, up to somebody's window. Through the window he saw the parents, dreaming their Christmas dreams. "It's a little too quiet in here. Let's see if I can't get 'em to scream." He snuck through the window and crouched by the bed. He withdrew his knife and bounced it on Daddy's head. He poked at Daddy Dearest, who awoke to the face of evil. The man let out a gasp of fear. "Yeah, I have that effect on people." Jeff slammed the knife through his skull. The mother screamed and tried to run, but Jeff caught up and gutted her. He seemed to be having a lot of fun. When he was done with the mother, he wrote his slogan on the wall, but then he heard the little footsteps making their way down the hall. He shot out of the room, then slammed the door. He couldn't let the child see his masterpiece of gore. In the hallway, he met a young little girl with eyes of bright blue and hair of blonde curl. The girl looked at Jeff, all dressed in Santa's gear. Her eyes lit up with excitement, and her voice filled with cheer. "Santa! I can't believe it's you!" This was the best moment of her life. And then she looked to his side and asked, "What are you doing with that knife?" "It's, for cutting the turkey. I'm making sure it's fresh for tomorrow." She glared at the knife again and said, "I've got a better one for you to borrow." She led him to the kitchen and opened up the drawer. His eyes were fixated on the knife that he just couldn't ignore. The monstrous knife with a serrated edge put his bloody weapon to shame. He pulled it from the drawer thinking, "This will be better for my reindeer game." "Will this work for you, Santa? Did I help you out?" Jeff patted the girl's head with praise and said, "Without a doubt." He sent the girl back to bed and made his way out the door. He hopped in his car and continued with his night of unspeakable horror. From home to home he went, having a ball with his slaughter, leaving behind a special present for every son and every daughter. He decorated the trees with intestines and filled their stockings with eyes. He made quick work of the parents, making sure the kids couldn't hear their cries. He propped up his victims on the couch in the living room, placing their heads in their laps, making a rather picturesque tomb. By the time he had finished, he could see the early light of day. He dished the costume, got in the car, and ended his night of horrid play. His first annual Christmas killing was very brutal, I must confess, but we all know that in his eyes, he saw it as his greatest success. That small town won't be the same. They will forever live in fear, because in the back of their minds they know that he'll do the same thing every year. So for those of you who live in a town of small population, be warned and prepare for a night of gore and devastation. Sleep with a gun, lock everything up, and don't forget this little thriller if you don't want to be the next victim of the infamous Jeff the Killer. And that is the tale of how Jeff killed Christmas. I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm gonna be honest, I actually had a lot more fun reading that than I expected. Camerahead. So this entry is far different from everything else that we've covered, primarily because it's a lost creepypasta. According to the Super Epic Failpedia wiki, look, just go with it. Quote, Camerahead, alternatively Cameraheads, or I Killed a Camerahead, is a lost creepypasta that revolved around a character's descent into madness after discovering the existence of entities known as Cameraheads. The story and associated characters supposedly predate other creepypasta characters such as Slender Man, The Rake, Smile Dog, and Jeff the Killer, unquote. The supposed synopsis of this tale goes like this. Quote, an anonymous 4chan user discovers a backpack with items in it, whether it be scattered books and a note, or tape, broken camera, and a letter. He finds the written message, I killed a Camerahead. The user then finds himself being stalked by the Cameraheads, posting photos of them as they hunt him, unquote. So yeah, that's the basic rundown. Obviously, I can't read you the story as it's, well, lost, but judging by the description, it certainly feels like something that would have existed around that time. If you happen to know or remember reading this tale or something similar to it, feel free to comment down below. But until then, this is a rare case of lost media in the creepypasta scene, or possibly an urban legend about an urban legend, or a creepypasta about a creepypasta. My family has been stalked for the last 4 years. I'll front load this by saying this is one of my personal favorites, mainly because it plays out like a really good stalker/slasher film, and it's just generally a very creepy and fun time. The story itself starts off like this. Quote, this whole thing started on a road trip around 4 years ago. We left to go from Northern California to the East Coast, traveling through the Midwest. It was me, my wife Kimmy, and our 7-year-old daughter Katie, and 5-year-old son Alex. Everything went fine for the first few days. We took our time on the trip because we really weren't on a constraint in that regard. We stopped at pretty much every landmark one can see whilst making a cross-country trip. But there was one night in a state in the Midwest I won't name that would lead to a series of events that still hasn't ended. It was around 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night. We had collectively decided to stop at the next place we saw to eat. We saw a sign to exit at the next ramp for a place called Daisy's Diner. We get there and nothing seems amiss. It was just about dark, and we decided that after we'd eaten, we would find a hotel for the night. Daisy's Diner was a classic small-town eatery with road signs on the wall and a waitress that called everyone hun. It had a very classic small-town USA feel to it. The food had a home-cooked taste to it as well. I could certainly imagine this place being at its capacity on any given day. However, at the time we were there were only 4 other people in the restaurant. A man and a woman ate together at a booth, while 2 men separately sat at the counter. All 4 of the other patrons left before we did, and were replaced with 2 more men who came in at separate times. It was the last man to come in to bring what had happened to our attention. He informed me that if I was the one with the Hyundai truck outside, it had been ransacked, unquote. And so he calls the police and they can't seem to find anything major that was stolen. And so after some questioning, he decides to let the police handle it, and he is advised to go to a local motel for the night. So they rested in the motel, only for something strange to find itself inside the motel room, right beside the front door. Quotes, after a shower, I sat on the bed to watch TV while my wife inevitably took 4 times longer than me to get ready. It was then that I decided to take a look at the checkout receipt. I picked up the one-sided piece of paper and opened it. My heart sank when it turned out to be a drawing from my daughter's backpack, but with a slight change. It was a picture of our family, but the thief had added a crudely drawn version of himself to it, with the words, "Nice to meet you," being that the addition to the drawing was done in crayon just like the original artwork had been. There was nothing about the man I could discern. All I knew was that whoever had broken into our car had followed us to the motel and slid this drawing under our door, or at least that's what I thought. My son, the ever-questioning, observant young man that he is, was playing on the ground with some toy cars near the door, asked me what the rubber piece lining the bottom of the door to the outside was for. I explained that it was likely to keep things such as leaves and snow from blowing under the door and keeping either heat or cold air in. It was then that I realized that the rubber strip would have prevented a piece of paper from being slid under the door. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Whoever had set this drawing on the floor had done so from the inside. I checked the locks on the connecting door and found one of them to be unlocked. In an effort to spare my wife and children the horror that I was currently experiencing, I rushed them out under the guise that we'd slept late and I wanted to cover a lot of ground that day. I considered talking to the motel clerk, but by that time, a younger girl was working the counter, and I wasn't going to stay there a second longer than I had to. We got back to the highway without interruption and continued our trip. My wife asked me what was wrong, but I shrugged it off as being still tired. We made the rest of our journey with nothing out of the ordinary happening, aside from the alarming incidents at Daisy's Diner and the Galleria Motel. Our road trip was actually pretty fun. Our activities proved to be a good distraction from the uneasy feeling I had in the pit of my stomach. I made sure to take a different route home, so as not to pass through the small town where the incidents had happened. We finally returned home about 3 weeks later. All of our mail was piled up on our front porch, so I grabbed it as I walked back into our house for the first time in nearly a month. Unpacking and getting situated took precedent over looking through the mail, but I eventually got to it and things began again. Towards the middle of the pile of mail, there was an envelope with no return address. I opened it and found a single handwritten note and a folded piece of paper. "The girl is very good at pictures." I unfolded the paper, and it was yet another drawing of my daughter's. This one was of a black and brown dog. I figured whoever was doing this had gotten our address from our vehicle's registration or some kind of other document after going through the car. I informed the police, who did a pretty shitty job of making me feel safe. I kept what had happened from my wife, as I knew that she would just worry, and I wanted to keep my family as stress-free as possible. I wondered how many pictures my daughter had in her backpack, but in reality, I knew it was quite a few. I'll get to that later, unquote. Well, about a week later, they hear barking outside, and the whole family run out, only to find a German Shepherd tied up in their backyard. The kids, of course, wanted to keep it, as did the wife after some convincing, and so the father does end up letting them keep him, even though he knew this dog came from, well, from their stalker. They would come to name the dog Roscoe. Other strange things start happening though, like their own lawn being cut and clean, and strangely nice things. But nonetheless, it all very much unnerved our protagonist. Our protagonist who, by the way, should have totally told his wife by this point. That's one of the few flaws in the story, but whatever. Since he knew some unseen person in the shadows was orchestrating all of this. For what goal, though, he couldn't be sure. This all comes to a head while at their summer cabin, Roscoe would be found dead, murdered, out in the front yard. Quote, as tears streamed down my face at the horror I was currently taking care of, I dug a hole for Roscoe. I gently placed him in the hole and pet his soft back one last time. I truly had come to care for the dog, no matter where it had come from. I filled the hole with dirt and went to put the shovel back in the shed. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it when I went to retrieve the shovel the first time, but on the siding of the cabin was a message, written in what I assumed was Roscoe's blood. It simply said, "Good doggy." I washed the message off before returning to my family. The entire time I had been dreading explaining to them what had happened. I sat my kids down and told them that while we were inside, another animal, probably much larger than Roscoe, had gotten into a fight with Roscoe and hurt him to the point where he had to go to doggy heaven. My wife and children cried and I joined them. None of us could believe that we had just lost the newest member of our family. With this though, I told everyone to pack up because it wasn't safe to stay in the area with such a large animal on the loose. They abided, and we were on the road within an hour, unquote. Skipping ahead a bit, our protagonist would continue to get creepy letters and later would receive a box with a letter and a VHS tape. What that tape contained was footage of a little girl being beaten and told what to say by some unseen figure. The message being clear though, the mysterious shadow that had been haunting them all this time wanted to be friends with his daughter. He wanted her, period. Once again skipping ahead, this is a rather long story after all, the family eventually find out what's been going on, and the wife is rather furious, and rightfully so, so they contact the police and they investigate as far as they could, but there was just no leads to speak of with this. The family lived in constant fear and would eventually come to move to a new town, hoping that this would stop this madness. And it did, for a while, before the letters started coming in again, and then the father received a box, this time with the hand of a little girl inside it, which once again had no DNA or evidence that could lead to the stalker's identity. It's then that the father decides to head back to the town where it all started in search of answers. He heads to that same little diner from before, and after questioning a few people and getting mostly nowhere, he eventually finds a hooded figure messing with his car, just like before, and he gives chase, but is then promptly knocked out from the back of his head. Quote, when I woke up, I was in the dark. I wasn't bound or gagged in any way, but I couldn't discern my surroundings. I found myself able to stand up straight, and when I did, about 25 televisions all turned on at once. They were all showing static, with the volume on full blast. I yelled, "Hello?" at the top of my lungs, but the sound of my voice was drowned out by the static. Then, so suddenly that it made me jump, each of the screens changed to a picture. It was the same room I'd seen in the video of the murder of that little girl. The same white sheet was hanging up, draping onto the floor, though this time, blood stained the bottom portion of the sheet. I assumed it was the little girl's blood, but I had no way of knowing if that was the only victim. Somehow I doubted it. A man came into the frame, but kept his back to me for the entirety of the video. He spoke to me in a high-pitched, yet gravelly voice. The best way I could describe his tone is that it was childlike. He spoke like an excited child.
Hi, Katie's daddy. I'm glad you got my present. I don't want to do no harm to your daughter, the great artist. I just want her to be my friend and draw me pictures. I sent them back the ones that weren't my favorite, but I kept the ones that are my favorites, and those are mine now. All I want is a friendship with Katie. Katie. She's such a very good artist, but you won't let her be friends with me. You're making me get you out of the way, and I don't want to do that because friends don't hurt friends' daddies. I want to be a good friend and not a bad friend, so I'm going to make this simple. Simple, easy peasy. If you promise to let your daughter, the artist, be friends with me, I'll leave you alone. But if you still won't be nice, I'm gonna get really angry. Do you promise to be nice?
I muttered out, yes, unsure as to if this was a video or a live feed, or if I was being watched or not. There were moments of silence, and then he spoke again, this time calmed down.
Good, but since you were such a meanie pants, I'm not gonna tell you how to get out.
Then he let out this sickening, childlike laughter. Then the video simply cut off, unquote. Now, our protagonist eventually finds his way out of this place that seems to be in the middle of the woods, and gets back home, only for eventually his own daughter to be found missing. They all knew what had happened, and for 2 months the police and everyone else tried to find her, but no luck. It could be assumed that she met with a terrible fate at the hands of that man-child. But by the 4th month of her kidnapping, the broken shell of a man who was her father ended up getting a new letter, one that was a brand new drawing by his daughter, of a farmhouse with an X over it, alongside a letter that told him he wants Daddy to come over to play with them. He promises not to hurt his daughter. He only wants more pictures from her, but if he catches wind he is bringing anyone else with him, he'll skin her alive. This eventually leads to a suspenseful conclusion, with the father eventually finding the exact farmhouse that the drawing crudely depicted, and facing off with the masked man. He does eventually fight and kill the masked man, save his daughter, and also find that, in a twist, the man who started all this to begin with was the very man who warned them about their car being ransacked all those years ago, alongside with the diner owner and the motel owner being related and in on this whole affair, as the stalker was their son. The story ends with all the bad parties either being killed or arrested, though there is one more letter the family would receive a year later about how now he was really mad, implying that the masked man had somehow survived a gunshot to his neck, but yeah, almost seems like a sequel hook to a sequel that, to my knowledge, never came. Overall though, this is a pretty well put together little story. It's not amongst the very, very best, and it does have some flaws. Like, I don't really know why after he kidnapped the daughter that he decided to give hints about where he's at. I mean, he basically won, so it seems kind of counterintuitive and frankly just stupid. But that objective plot hole aside, it is still a pretty decent little creepypasta about a pretty creepy situation. The house that death forgot. So this one is pretty simple. Basically, this girl gets a phone call from her dad who she doesn't have a good relationship with, and ends up taking a drive to his place. Along the way, she ends up at an abandoned road with no clear stop in sight, up until she reaches a house that seems to advertise itself as a place to stay. Well, she ends up staying there for the night, only to find out that the house is holding a terrible secret. There are various people in the house with awful slashes, scars, and limbs absolutely destroyed and torn asunder. They all look as though they should be dead, but they aren't, because for some strange reason, they cannot die. The one that gave them these scars is a man in a dark coat that stalks the house, his marks made forever upon them, still searing with the same pain from the very same day they received them. Thus, they are the house that death forgot. They have no idea who the man outside is, or why he has condemned them to such a fate. But They all warn the new girl that she cannot leave this place right now. She'll have to wait, and that if she tries to escape this place, the man will surely strike her and leave her in the same starry state as them. But she of course doesn't listen because, she's fucking stupid, I guess. And yeah, she becomes one of them with one of her eyes gouged out, and now she permanently has the pain of one of her eyes being gouged out. It's a decent concept for a story, but our main protagonist is kind of, how do I put this? Fucking brain dead. And, yeah, the whole thing sort of ends on a bit of a, really? You went out there after they all told you what was gonna happen? And it ended exactly the way you expected it would. It also kind of feels like the beginning of what would be a bigger story maybe, but to my knowledge there is no other story to it. But hey, for what it is, it's not too bad. Memory card. So this one has got to be one of the weirdest fucking stories that I have ever read. And that's definitely saying something. Not weird in like the dogscape sort of weird, that's sort of his own category, but just weird generally speaking. A good friend of mine on Discord actually recommended this one to me, telling me that whatever I think this story is about, I'm wrong. And boy oh boy, was he ever right. So the story starts like this. Quote, a few weeks ago my parents were driving up to see my cousins. We always visit them during the summer. On the way there we drove through a little village. Some church by the road was having a car boot sale. A massive banner told us that it was in aid of charity. My dad parked the car and got out, eager to have a little sniff around. He always had a thing for raking through people's old stuff and finding hidden treasures. While he was off treasure hunting, I decided to go off on my own little wander. Most of the stuff on sale was the usual crap: cakes, ugly crockery, junk, etc. Someone was holding a raffle. An old woman was painting kids' faces, but only seemed to know how to do one animal. There were zebra-faced kids everywhere. I remember a couple standing out over all the happiness and sense of community. There was just a man and a woman with dead eyes taking no interest in their customers at all. All they did was just stare into the distance. Their tables full of kids' junk, you know, toys, magazines, crap, PlayStation games. The usual. There were a lot of those Army Men games. A few sports games as well. I reckon I missed the good stuff. I was losing interest when I spotted an old PS1 memory card out of the corner of my eye. Written on the front in chipped Tipp-Ex was the name Sam. Now this was a real hidden treasure. I bought it from the couple and tucked it into my wallet. Neither said a word or looked at me when they took my money. After that I found my parents once more. Eventually we got back to the car and were once again on our way to my cousin's house. We stayed there for a few days. I enjoyed hanging out with my cousins, so I was quick to forget about my purchase. In addition, neither had a PlayStation, so it didn't matter anyway. When I got back home, I retrieved my old PlayStation from the attic and set it up. I had kept quite a few games too. I had all the classics: Resident Evil, Final Fantasy, Tomb Raider, Metal Gear Solid, Future Cop, etc. Bro, who the fuck is considering Future Cop one of the PS1 classics? However, before I played any of them, I turned on the console without a disc in. I remembered I could do this to check out the contents of your memory card. I stuck Sam's into the slot and selected it. There were a few save files on it. Some of them were corrupt, just strange symbols hanging there that displayed a strange series of characters instead of details. Others were games I had never heard of. However, there was one I recognized: Metal Gear Solid. It was the VR missions disc, to be precise. It said it had been completed 100%. I had both Metal Gear Solid and the VR missions, so I decided to check it out. I could remember quite a bit about the VR missions disc, but the parts that stuck out for me the most were the giant soldiers, the murder mysteries, and the photo shoot mode. I remember they were actually a lot of fun. I booted up the game, unquote. So that's the opening, the setup if you will. A fairly typical one for a video game based creepypasta at that. So what's the rest of this story going to contain? Well, let's read it, shall we? So when I loaded the save, something odd happened. The title music stopped. This sounded especially weird because I had turned up the volume on my TV, so I could get right into the game. There I was, suddenly plunged into silence. On top of that, there was no sound effects as I scrolled through the menu options. It was a little eerie, but I chalked it up to the game or the console being old and worn out. I remembered you could wait for Naomi's legs to uncross to take a photo in photoshoot mode, and there was nothing except a black space where a pussy should have been. It was a little empty void left by the creators to disappoint a million pubescent kids. Amused, I loaded up photoshoot mode and selected Naomi as my model. When the level loaded, I remember thinking the music sounded a little strange. It was nothing eerie, just a little odd. Maybe it was slightly slowed down or something. Again, I chalked it up to either the game or the console's age. I made Snake duck down and look through the viewfinder, staring at Naomi's crotch and waiting for her to uncross her legs. I was determined to get that snap that had destroyed my perverted hopes and dreams all those years ago. It took longer than I had thought, and the first time it happened, I missed it. Waiting again, I almost missed a second time. Luckily, my reflexes have been sharpened by generations of gaming. Click. Gotcha. A perfect snap of the little black zone where her piece should have been. I smiled to myself and shook my head. It was funny that I had gotten so excited over something all those years ago. I was getting a little hungry, so I decided to take a break. I was just about to head downstairs for some food when I noticed something. I could hear crying. There were little sniffles and short intakes of breath. At first I had no idea where it was coming from. For a moment I noticed it was from behind me. Then I realized it was coming from the game. I remember getting confused, sitting there to listen to some voice from the TV speakers. I just couldn't work out why it was happening. It started getting louder and a little more hysterical. I figured out it was coming from Naomi. I tilted the camera upwards, wondering what the fuck was going on. Just as I got to her face, a horrible wail tore from my speakers and scared the shit out of me. Naomi was screaming at me. I just had time to register her twisted mouth and horrible eyes when I gasped and dropped the controller. It landed on the ground on a button and the game came out of viewfinder mode. Snake was just kneeling there in front of her. I stood there, shaking, watching the characters seem to stare at one another. I could no longer see Naomi's face. I couldn't tell if she still had that horrible look across it. There was no one in my house. My parents were both still at work. I jumped forward and turned the console off. Unquote. I love how this guy just assumes this activity of his was something everyone did. A weird, obscure activity in a relatively speaking, obscure sort of bonus discs of sorts that you had to buy separately for Metal Gear Solid. It really could not be more random and does, funnily enough, feel like the author projecting something he clearly did do onto the audience of readers. Yeah, you guys all remember, you know, that weird, perverted thing that you could do in this game? Yeah, we all did that, right? It wasn't just me. We all clearly did the exact same thing. I mean, like, wouldn't it be, like fucking weird if I, like, did it right now? What if I just did it right fucking now? What if I did the weird PS1 thing right now? Because we're all, it's like so relatable, right? We all fucking did it. Yes, simply marvelous. But that, of course, isn't the end of the story. And believe it or not, that's just the beginning, as the story gets a fair bit weirder. See, eventually the guy turns the game back on and finds that the photoshoot thing is, well, not working and generally acting like a typical creepypasta video game that the author, of course, assumes is but more glitches from the age of the game or the console or some shit. Why, I mean, that's, again, so relatable. Just the other day, I saw my video game shut off and turn into a red and black screen that showed my IP address with text right underneath that said, the CCP is gonna have a fucking great time with my household tonight. Ha! Silly glitches. I've got nothing to worry about. Besides, everyone knows the coalition of creepypastas would never be competent enough to write such a coherent sentence. Well, anyway, our narrator takes some pictures using the photo mode in the complete darkness of the game, and then goes on to check out his in-game photos. And it's here where some pretty messed up jumping of the shark stuff happens. Quote, eventually I gave up. I scrolled across to the next image, the first shot of where Naomi should have been standing. What I was faced with was something completely different. It was a picture of a little boy, tied up against a bed. It wasn't an in-game photo, but a real one. It was a real boy, on a real bed, with real ropes. The picture was slightly pixelated, but nothing compared to the low resolution of the game. Just at the edge of the picture, I could make out a leg. Someone was standing by the bedside. Something told me to turn the game off. Something darker told me to scroll to the next photo. I listened to the latter. The next photo made my stomach jump. Gloved hands were holding the boy's eyes open. They were forcing him to look at something off camera. The boy's expression was of absolute horror. A part of me was glad I couldn't see what he saw. I continued scrolling. They were torturing him now, cutting open his skin and mutilating him in ways I won't describe. The photos only became more and more disturbing, never letting up. Each one was worse than the last. They violated him and tortured his young body. I'd never seen anything like it. I never knew humans were capable of such acts. My body was shaking and my hands could barely hold on to the controller, but I kept scrolling through the pictures. I was unable to stop myself." Unquote. Ah, yeah, the gold standard for those who can't come up with a way to make the scary stories scary. You know, just have some fucking pictures of children being not a fucking live, you know? That's how you do it. And in a strange way, this story actually goes far harder than any other one, because like usually they're like flash images that for some reason the guy watching the video or whatever just happens to remember like really well, whereas this one he's able to pause and really look at the image for a long time. And not only does he do that, he keeps fucking going. In a strange way, the story almost implies that the dude, or some side of him, is enjoying seeing this shit. That's pretty fucked up, I'll give you that. But ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that wasn't the strangest set of words, of ideas surrounding this story? Quote, I came to another image. I was relieved to see it was no longer of a boy. This relief, however, was short-lived. I squinted at the screen, wondering what exactly I was looking at. Then it hit me. My insides did a little wet flip, and I froze. I dropped the controller again, no buttons being pressed when it hit the floor this time. I was staring at an image, mouthing, "What the fuck?" to myself over and over again. I stayed like that for a while, my body completely functionless as I gaped at the screen. It was a shot of Naomi, with her legs uncrossed. It was the very first photo I had taken after switching on the game. It was the photo that had started this horrible journey. Now, however, I could actually see her pussy. It was the real image of a pussy, not pixelated or anything. It was just sitting right there in front of me in incredible detail. If I was still a teenager, I'm sure I would have been delighted that all my hard work had paid off. I'm pretty sure every kid who tried getting a photo of her snatched back then would have felt the same, especially when compared to the black void that too many of us actually faced. However, I was far from aroused in this situation. I noticed that the pussy was moving, pulsating with every breath, as though I was watching a movie instead of an image. It was like some voyeur spy cam or something, and it was squelching. As I sat there, speechless, blood slowly seeped from the inside, dribbling over her lips and legs, and spreading fast. When her pussy was completely caked in red, Naomi finally began to move her body. She was slowly leaning down towards the camera. I really didn't want to see her face. but I couldn't look away. Then she was screaming and staring at me with those horrible eyes and twisted mouth. She wasn't looking at the camera, but at me. I screamed back before she lunged. Out of nowhere, I found the strength. I watched as my arm shot out from my body and hit the power button. Her scream cut short. The screen went black. I tore the memory card from its slot and held it as though it was some potent drug. I realized I was breathing heavily. I kept staring at the name Sam in white tip X as my lungs gradually relaxed. I never plugged it back in. That was the last time I ever played VR missions. I still have the memory card in my drawer, but I daren't open it. A part of me wants to bind the damn thing, but the other part won't let me. Maybe one day I'll give it another go, just to see how messed up the rest of the game is. Perhaps I'll buy some of the other games and see how fucked up Sam's saves for them are. Maybe I'll try and figure out what games those other corrupt save files are for. Maybe. But for now, well, the memory card can stay in that drawer until I'm ready. The end. And that's the story of Memory Card. A terrible, extremely weird, but oddly amusing creepypasta. And truly fit for the bottom of the iceberg, I'd say. Oh, and in case you're wondering about the whole sequel hook at the end of this creepypasta, as far as I'm aware, there was never any other sequels written by this author to find out what the other games were, or why there was like the child experimentation thing going on. That's just all left up in the air. I'm sure all of it would have been thoroughly stupid, and perhaps thoroughly weird at that, but also probably would have been some top quality cringe as well, so it's a shame. The Stray. It was a sunny summer afternoon when I had finally crammed the last box into our new house. This house was a lot closer to my mother's work, so I guess it was just a lot more convenient. It was a very nice neighborhood with nice people. Unlike the neighborhood we moved from, our old neighbors would file noise complaints when there was nothing going on. That was because they just hated us. Even though the new neighborhood was nice, there was one thing about it that seemed off. Everything was just a little too nice. I don't know how to put it into words, but everyone seemed a little too excited than they should have been getting new neighbors. I guess that was because so many people were suddenly moving out. I asked the neighbors why they were moving out, and they said it was because one of the neighbors recently went missing, and there was no trace. When winter was just starting to roll in, we noticed that there was a male stray dog roaming around in the 3-foot deep snow. We did not think much of it because we had seen stray dogs in the city. We thought if we just ignored it and did not feed it, maybe it would leave us alone. The day after we first saw the stray, it was on our porch. It was just lying there, panting. It was a rather thin dog. We think it was malnourished. We called the local pound to take the dog in and nurse it back to health. Before they arrived, the dog ran away, leaving a trail of footprints through the snow. The dog catchers followed the dog's footprints in the snow, but they seemed to stop in an open field. The next day, we saw the dog again. This time, it had a bloodied squirrel in its mouth. He was quite proud of the catch, carrying it around everywhere he went. We once again called the dog catcher, but that dog was too smart to be caught. That is when we gave up trying to catch that dog. If those incompetent dog catchers could not catch a big skinny dog, are they even qualified to catch any dog? A few days later, we went on a vacation. It was only an overnight trip, but I don't want to give any details. When we came back, a few things in the house were knocked over. We looked around and nothing was missing. Someone had broken into our house and we were kind of worried. Someone knew we were gone, even though we had our car outside, and did everything we could to make it look like we were still there. We called the police, we told them everything we knew, and while detectives dusted for prints, there were none. We saw that dog again, but this time he was a little thinner than last time. My parents went to work and took me to school like normal. There was not anything else that was necessarily different about that day until we got home. There was a bloodied squirrel in the front porch. We knew it was that dog. However, we could not do anything about it for now. We disposed of the squirrel and life went on. It was a very cold morning, colder than most. We found that dog lying on our porch, but this time he was quite fat, and his teeth had a reddish tint. He was sitting there, licking his chops. There were some dog paw prints in the snow behind him. We decided to follow the footprints to see where they were coming from. They led to a small cave. Inside of that cave, we saw a dead body lying face down with a hiking backpack nearby. We immediately called the police. The police followed us to the cave and did an autopsy. The man died of a heart condition. The man was named Jeremy Jensen. We did not know him, but we still felt sorry for him. He appeared to have been dead for a while. He had a rather large hole in his stomach when he was found. I froze. It was then that I realized why the dog was suddenly so fat. We started keeping a rifle in the house in case the stray dog showed up. We did not want to be the next victims. We did not see the dog for the next week or two. We thought that the dog catchers finally caught him, or maybe animal control put him down, but we still kept the rifle just in case. Things were slowly going back to normal. At this point, I had not seen the dog in a month. We all agreed to put the rifle in the closet. In case we invited someone over, they would not feel threatened. Bro, I just gotta stop right here and say two things. Number one, this story is written in such a way, like such a matter-of-fact way of writing a sentence. It's one of the most boring and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this happened type of stories. I hate this type of writing. Fucking awful. But also, what do you mean? Where were you having the fucking gun beforehand? Like, in your hands at all times? What, did you have on the couch? Where are you putting it normally if not in the closet? But back to the story. More time passed and we thought we were all safe. However, one cold night in January, colder than most, I was in bed when I suddenly woke up. There, standing over me, was the stray. He knew we put the gun away. I shoved the dog out of the way and darted for the closet with the gun inside. I took it out and aimed. I looked away and pulled the trigger. Click, nothing happened. I pulled the trigger again. Click, it wasn't loaded. The dog was getting closer. So I grabbed the gun by the barrel and swung with all my might. Crack! The handle broke over the dog's head. It fell to the floor unconscious. The crack woke up my parents, who were absolutely shocked. We called the dog catcher to take away the dog and dispose of its body. We still don't know how the dog possibly managed to break into our house. Twice for that matter, but now the stray is dead. We have not had a break-in since then, and that was at least 5 years ago. One day I saw a dog that looked rather similar roaming through the street. It reminded me of the stray. I asked my neighbors if they remember it, and they asked me what it looked like. I told them what it looked like, and they explained how they had always seen a dog like that a few years back in the graveyard, lying beside a tombstone, presumably of its owner. I asked who the owner was. They took me to an open field and showed me the gravestone. It said Jeremy Jensen, 1982-2009. The dog knew he was there. So far, this is what I have pieced together. Jeremy Jensen and the dog were on a hike, and then he died in a cave of a heart attack. The dog ran around looking for help, but to no avail. The dog became more and more thin and eventually started stealing food from people's houses. The dog eventually gave up and got desperate for food. He then resorted to eating a large area around the owner's stomach to survive. Nobody in my family will ever forget this disturbing story, as its memories still come back to haunt us on a day-to-day basis. The end. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I have no fucking idea why this pasta, of all pastas, was at the bottom of this iceberg. I mean, I guess it is really bad, but it's kind of bad in like one of those, okay, like that's the story. It's like really matter of fact and not really interestingly written at all. There's not any real hook. There's no twist. It's very straightforward and just kind of exists overall. In fact, it kind of reminds me just a little bit of Rouge.EXE in that writing style. I mean, Rouge.EXE is way worse than this, I'd say, but also probably more entertaining than this one. So, yeah, what's next? I investigate disturbing cases. Here are my stories. Written by Brian Young, this is one of those series that started out on the No Sleep subreddit and follows a paranormal investigator and what cases he ends up getting himself into and needing to solve. Although, I guess, technically, he's just a normal detective, but all the stories within this series are paranormal in nature. There are 5 episodes to this series, being titled The Tall Woman, The Watchers, The Hermit, Hammerhead, and Voices from Nature. The series follows a no-nonsense detective who is very much aware of the dark reality of his job, with the first chapter opening with, quote, "They say that everyone has a case that haunts them. Personally, if it's just one case, then clearly whoever they are isn't doing very good police work. Being a detective is gritty and bleak. You aren't dealing with happy endings. You're dealing with the cold, hard truth. Sure, every now and again you get an easy case. The missing kid who just so happens to be at a friend's house. Or the argument turned bad where the bullet just so happens to miss every vital organ. Open and shut, everyone goes home with a smile on their face, or at least the life they were given. But that's not the norm. Something you learn quickly from this job is how different we are. Each person taking you down a wholly unique path filled with their own challenges. Each time you try and understand the person you're dealing with, but most of the time, you never really do. Even if you solve a case, you've opened doors that can never be shut, and just like that, you're now involved in the lives of people that extend beyond the court date. Someone doesn't stop being dead after a guilty verdict. A woman doesn't stop crying after her abuser has been sentenced. And a person doesn't stop being missing just because you moved on to another case. At the end of the day, if you can't cope with being haunted by what will eventually amount to a hell of a lot more than one case, then this isn't the job for you. That being said, when the case of a missing girl was casually dropped on my desk one rainy August afternoon, I was less than reluctant to make it a priority." Unquote. I'm not going to go into hyper detail about these stories, mainly because, I want to finish this video sometime soon, and these are all rather long stories. But the point is it doesn't start off as a paranormal investigation, but a simple missing persons report. One that leads our detective to realize that there are things beyond the police's ability to stop. Creatures, anomalies, things that go bump in the night, such as a tall woman that crawls on all fours like a spider, kidnapping children in the area, or a strange old man who enjoys watching people from windows, appearing late in the night in the reflection, and is then gone just as quickly. There is an overall sense of real danger, as this isn't one of those stories where the police investigators take out the evil presence, but rather confirm that it is one of those things, hide it from the public, and get whoever it is they are targeting out of the area. Find convenient excuses for them moving to a new home. The whole thing is pretty immersive and deals with themes of the truth, conspiracy, and where it all lies, and how ultimately powerless we are to these forces beyond our known world, and whether or not these things should be known to the wider public. It's a pretty damn good set of stories that I highly recommend. Oh shit, this is it, the center. We're so close. All sense of perception is starting to break down. I'm starting to break down. But we must reach the core, the end, the finale, or all of this will have been for nothing. Do you hear them? They know we're here. Entities born from the imagination of others. Demons created from the subconscious. Protectors of the dream machine. We must be swift. Even the most corny of creepypasta characters are uniquely powerful in this space. But you see, they aren't the actual characters here anymore, but rather the idea, the fandom's perception of these characters. I guess what I'm saying is, if you don't want to get fucked raw in the ass by Jeff the Killer, we need to hurry. Rouge.EXE. Yes, you heard that right. Rouge.EXE. If you're somebody that is already in the know, you understand we're about to read one of the most atrociously put together things that's ever been passed off as a creepypasta. If you don't know, well, I guess I just told you, didn't I? You know, sadly enough, I did want to look into this one to see if I could find the author or more information about Rouge.EXE, but I couldn't find any information about it, sadly enough. That being said, it is super short, so why don't we go ahead and give it a read, eh? Quote, "Hey, my name is Christopher Williams. I am a big fan of Rouge the Bat, and I about to made Rouge call her. Dark Rouge.EXE. Made by Gmod. I find a perfect picture to create. I got scare of her right now in way she eat people. In shock, people blood out. She was white in Gary old picture. In her sister is White Rouge. She is powerful lady. She hurt people. I kill. To her line is, I am Dark Rouge, and I go take your heart out and white one. I am White Rouge. I will suck your soul out. She found Knuckles. In Knuckles turn head. In she got a creepy smile. Her face in her sister to Venny about are powerful of Tur darkness. I think I made her in Gmod in my computer. Start bring picture of Rouge.EXE. The one in Shmy Rose head got cut off by Dark Rouge. And 2 is Amy Rose was walking with Sally Akron, and they saw Dark Rouge and White Rouge. They were start walking to them. Amy and Sally run and screaming loud. They stop running. They saw Sonic.EXE, and I said, Sonic, what he doing there? And he said to them, you're too slow, and you cannot escape from them. In Dark Rouge and White Rouge attacking them and eat them. To in Sonic laughing, I said, go by Amy. In Sally start laughing again. So me, I got to race how to kill Amy and Sally that are good people. I said, why? Start cry. I turn off my computer. I see a dark and white outside my windows. In Venny start a creepy smiley and bleed teeth and bloody pick black eye. One Dark Rouge eye in pitch black in red. They bout disappearing in I don't believe it ever. I never start making horror stuff no more. I start dreaming about them me. Dream is dark black, and I was in there with Sonic in 2 sister, and they said, we are God now, and we are going to eat you. And creepy Ben drowned behind me. I said, Ben, what are you doing here? They all eat me. I woke up. I saw a Dark Rouge in my bed. Never she her in her sister again. The end. Do I Do we need to say anything about this? Do we need to be snarky internet owlman for this one? I mean, what the fuck? Do you even know what I just read? Do you have any fucking idea what was just told to you? How many minutes did I just spout off random fucking nonsense to you? How long did you listen to that? Did you catch any of that? Well, I'll tell you one thing. If you noticed the background footage right now, you might have caught, that didn't stop people from making Rouge.EXE fan art and Rouge.EXE fan games. Yes, the bar was apparently exceedingly low, you know, because like Salt.exe, I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of a bad story, but hey, I mean, it's fucking Shakespeare compared to this. Sally.exe, pretty bad, pretty fucking weird, dumb, lazy ass story. Don't know. It's looking pretty fucking good compared to what I just read. Now, this is also why I wanted to try to figure out who the author of this story was. Not to shame them necessarily, but maybe to get some insight as to if this was a troll pasta, which kind of makes sense given what it is, or if this is just one of the worst things anyone has ever written and attempted to put on like the wiki. It's probably made by some child, probably, but I guess we'll never know unless someone out there happens to know. But moving on, Hell.EXE. Hell.EXE. No, really, Hell.EXE. This is where we have found ourselves. Though, funnily enough, this EXE story doesn't really have a lot in common with other EXE stories. It's actually a lot more like a ritual creepypasta. In fact, it just basically is one, but with like an EXE thrown in there as a little bit of a twist of lime. And it is, of course, based on a ritual on how to see hell. And, you know, see what hell looks like, I guess. That's the ritual. And, it's well, to put it bluntly, it's pretty fucking stupid. Quote, "Have you ever wondered if it is possible to visit the afterlife without actually dying? The saying goes that if you can only go to heaven or hell if you're dead, but this is not entirely true. You can indeed have a brief visit to the afterlife and meet your dead friends, relatives, and even meet God. Sounds good, right? But there is one catch. It's not exactly easy. Many who have returned changed as individuals. Some even chose to take their own lives afterwards. Many lost their sanity, and only a small percentage remained what you'd call sane after their journey. Even though all refused to describe what they saw, I'm different. I have been to both heaven and hell several times, and in this article I'm going to describe how to visit hell and meet some of your dead relatives that have sinned throughout their mortal lives. For the journey, you will need to be a well-rounded individual with a strong mentality, otherwise you will not be able to cope with what you see. Most importantly, you will need to have killed somebody at least once in your life before you try this." Unquote. Wait. So, okay, if all this is real, why would you kill someone? I mean, doesn't that kind of defeat the point? You might imagine that if you want to see hell from a semi-safe position, or in such a way that you don't end up there for eternity, you wouldn't do something that would make you end up going there for eternity. If you have to kill someone, then won't you end up going to hell when you die anyway? Especially if you kill someone with the express purpose of going to hell? Also remember that this guy said that he's been to heaven and hell several times, and that he's able to describe what he saw. Remember this specifically because it's going to be a bit of a sticking point later on. But moving on, here are the instructions. Quote, "First, you head to your nearest church from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. on a Sunday night. If the door is locked, gain entry somehow. If impossible, then try the second closest church. Once inside, approach the altar and kneel down in praying position. Then in a monotone voice, repeat this following scripture clearly. Volo, Viseri, Tarum, Ubi, Cruciabitior, Igni, Et, Sulfur, Quad, I'm gonna fucking stop, okay? I don't know how to fucking read these words. Let's move on. If done correctly, you should fall asleep instantly and wake up in your room. On the edge of your bed should be a piece of paper. On the piece of paper, there should be a link to a website. This link varies from person to person. Find an old computer with no fucking internet connections or any means of communication to the outside world, as you do not want the most horrifying demons imaginable to know your location. Boot up the computer and load up an internet browser and enter the link. Despite the lack of internet connections, you should be directed to a blank page with a hyperlink in the middle stating your name and date of death. Whatever you do, do not click on the hyperlink. Instead, save the page and view the HTML file in Notepad. Scroll to the bottom of the document, and there should be an address. Make sure you write this down. Once you finish with the computer, take it as far away as you can, destroy it, and never return to the church you visited again. A week later, visit the address you wrote down, and it should be an old abandoned warehouse that was never there before. Do not enter this building yet, but instead knock on the door exactly 6 times. If any more or less, you will be greeted by the devil himself, and you will be damned to a place far worse than hell. If all is well, an old man should open the door and hand you a blank CD with the words Hell.EXE written onto it. Run this on another PC if you're willing to sacrifice with no inward or outward communication. On the CD should be 2 files, Diablo.jpg and Hell.EXE. Do not fucking view Diablo.jpg. It will cause you to rip your own eyes out. Don't worry, it does not have a thumbnail. Just run Hell.EXE. Instantly, your monitor should start flickering and gruesome pictures of the mutilated corpses of your dead relatives should flash quickly on and off your screen. Then a window should pop up with 2 buttons, one saying come and one saying leave. Now is your last chance to turn back. If you want to visit hell, then click come. If not, click leave, and you will fall unconscious and wake up in your bedroom with no memory Hell.EXE even existed, and all evidence of its existence will be lost. If you chose come, the window will close and the computer will spontaneously combust along the CD. Do not leave the room you're in. Just let the flames spread until the heat knocks you unconscious. You should wake up on a hospital bed in a dark room with no clothes on. Do not get out of the bed. Just lay there. After about 5 minutes, 2 people should enter the room. I cannot be any clearer on this. Just keep your eyes tight shut when they approach your bed. If you look at them even once, they will rip you to pieces. They will discuss in familiar voices how unfortunate your death was, and describe it in complete detail. This applies to the date of death you found on the website. Cover your ears if you do not want to hear your own fate. Afterwards, they should leave the room hastily. Wait about 10 minutes, then exit the room. Once you have exited the room, you should be in a very long corridor with the lights out. Start walking down the corridor. Once you have walked about 3 kilometers, all the lights should turn on. When this happens, run. Run as fast as you can down the corridor until you reach a fire escape door. Throw yourself through the door at full force and then slam the door shut behind you as soon as you burst through. You are now in limbo." Unquote. From here, limbo is described in detail as well as hell, and how you apparently need to cut out your own eyes because you shouldn't be able to see anything here or else you'll go mad. But that sort of feels like it defeats the point, right? I thought you did all this to see hell. Now you just get in there to hear and feel and smell it, I guess. I mean, why not just close your eyes and jump into a fucking garbage can in the hot summer day or something? Same fucking difference. I guess what I'm asking is why the fuck would anyone do this? Usually with these rituals, there's something to be gained. And even knowledge is at least something, and this doesn't even really seem like knowledge. It just really seems like a really crazy dream that you can't see anything with. You're not allowed to look at any of the creepy shit. So what's the point? Well, at any rate, the guy does go on to describe hell, and at one point, forgets that he cut his own eyes out because he then describes what it fucking looks like. And then the devil speaks to him and he ends up believing that his soul belongs to the devil himself and goes on to do bad things in the world, etc. It's nothing special, though it is really sudden and just completely nonsense because at the beginning of the story, he said that he's been to heaven and hell several times, but I guess he's an agent of the devil now randomly at the end. We also never get to hear a description of heaven either. That's just something they just bring up at the beginning and then it's never addressed again. Even though he went to limbo, you figure he'd like take a look at both. I don't fucking know. Anomaly. So this one is a classic in my books. One of those creepypastas that perfectly tap into that dark reality, while leaving the reader ever curious as to what comes next. The story starts off with a production editor at a small independent publisher in the US relaying his or her story of how they came upon a set of eerie photos with unsettling backstories. They had all come from an old man who had a set of rare archival photos, all of which were anomalies, as noted before, and he wanted to have them published, though he would only have one photo sent to them at a time, as he was very protective and paranoid of the pictures getting out to the public until he was ready to get some money from it all. Which became a rather grueling task to play the same song and dance with the guy with each individual photo. And after all that work, a private buyer ended up offering a far higher price for the photo collection than they could provide as a publishing company. And while they tried to appeal to him as a historian, in the end money won out, and they were forced to legally delete all their copies of the photos. However, our author always secretly stows away pictures and the like on their own personal computer whenever they're working on these sorts of projects, mostly for messing with colors, fonts, and the like with the pictures. But now, after months of hard work all going down the drain in an instant, they decided it was best to share these photos and their stories online for all to see, as a bit of a fuck you and revenge to the guy that made them waste all their time over the last several months, but also because they are rather interesting and historically significant. They then go on to describe the photos, which you'll be able to see on screen here as the stories are relayed. Quote, Photo 1 of 14. The Collinwood Fire. This is the last known photo taken inside the Lakeview School in Collingwood, Ohio, before it was consumed by fire on March 4th, 1908, killing 172 students, 2 teachers, and 1 rescuer. The fire started when a ceiling joist ignited from a nearby steam pipe. Flames blocked escape routes, leading to panic and a stampede that trapped a large number of victims in a stairwell where they were cooked alive. Additional casualties were incurred when burning students jumped from 2nd and 3rd story windows. Everyone in this photo perished, except for Mr. Olson, seated at the far right in the back row. The spectral artifacts in the photo remain unexplained. Photo 2 of 14. Charlie Noonan's last interview. Charlie Noonan was an amateur folklorist who traveled through the South and southwestern United States during the early years of the 20th century, collecting tall tales and stories of the supernatural. According to his wife, Ellie, Charlie was told a story one day by an Oklahoma farmer about a strange woman who lived alone on an isolated property in the Panhandle. The farmer claimed the woman was not a woman at all, but something else. Something that hid its true nature beneath a headscarf and was never seen without a large dog by its side. Noonan was apparently intrigued enough to try searching for the woman during one of his research road trips. He was never seen again. Ellie Noonan was later contacted by a Tulsa pawnbroker who remembered reading about her husband's disappearance in the papers after finding his name engraved on a camera sold to him by an itinerant. The pawnbroker returned the camera, and Mrs. Noonan had the film inside developed in the hopes of finding a clue as to his whereabouts. This was the only photo on the roll. Unfortunately, neither the location of the property nor the name of the farmer who told him the story was recorded in Noonan's notes. Photo 3 of 14. The Death of John Olstead. This prophetically torn photograph depicts a regimental color guard of the Union Army, 1 month before they marched into battle at Antietam, September 1862. The gentleman on the far right, John Olstead, had the right side of his face and right arm blown off by cannon fire at the start of those hostilities. It is unknown exactly when the damage to the photo occurred. Photo 414, The Axeman of New Orleans. Edouard Martel was an unsuccessful French photographer and inventor who traveled throughout the US during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, trying to drum up interest and investors for a device that added timer and automatic exposure features to Kodak's popular line of folding brownie cameras. During his travels, he took thousands of automated photos to test and refine his invention. Often, he would wake up early, set up a hidden camera in an inconspicuous spot on the streets of whatever city he happened to be in, and then walk to a nearby cafe or bar so that he could capture candid scenes of daily life to remember his travels by. The best of these photos were selected for Martel's one and only gallery show in Paris 1924. Unfortunately, Martel died penniless and unknown in 1955, and it was left to his daughter Jean to sort through the boxes and boxes of photos he left behind to see what should be kept and what could be discarded. During this process, she came across this photo taken in New Orleans on the morning of October 28, 1919, a few hours before Martel boarded a steamer ship and returned to France. It turns out that Martel hated motion blurs in his photographs because he thought they would reflect badly on the speed and accuracy of his lens mechanism. This prejudice made him cast aside and overlook what was probably the most important photo he ever took. What makes this photo so special? The night before this was taken, the notorious and still unidentified serial killer, known only as the Axeman of New Orleans, had committed his last murder, hacking Mike Pepitone to death in his bedroom, and then fleeing the scene just as Pepitone's wife was discovering the body. Could this be him returning to his residence? It's impossible to say, but if it is, the image appears to beguile the legend based on the shaky testimony of Pauline and Mary Bruno and prevailing prejudice at the time, that only a black man was capable of such savagery. Photo 5 of 14, The Grand Caverns Cryptids. This photo was taken in 1895 by an amateur spelunker / photographer named Orrin Jeffries while exploring an unmapped section of Grand Caverns in southwestern Virginia. At the time it was taken, Jeffries was conducting photographic experiments using super long exposures to see if anything at all could be captured in the total absence of light, otherwise known as cave darkness. He would situate himself on level ground, extinguish his lantern, and then open the lens of his homemade box camera. For as long as he could stand in the darkness, during one of these experiments, he heard something approach from the deeper recesses of the cave. Frightened, Jeffries abandoned his experiment and set off one of the Blitzlicht flashes he used for taking traditional photos underground. According to the report he later gave at a local newspaper, Jeffries saw 3 humanoid creatures staring at him from the shadows and took off running in the other direction, and didn't stop running until he was topside. Several days later, he returned with 3 other men to retrieve his box camera. This is the image that was recorded on the film inside. Photo 6 of 14, The Harlow Twins. 1938, Evergreen Park, Illinois, outside of Chicago. Billy and Stevie Harlow were riding in the front seat with their mother Tammy when their Ford sedan collided head-on with a Chrysler. During the collision, the car spun in such a way as to impact 2 additional vehicles. Tammy Harlow survived, but the boys were ejected through the windshield and killed instantly. The crime scene photographer from the local paper took this shot as the crew of volunteers worked frantically to free John Downing, the driver of the Chrysler. It appears that little Billy and Stevie stuck around to watch. Photo 714, the Sorensen tragedy. The Sorensens were a Danish family who immigrated to the United States sometime between 1905 and 1906. They arrived with their eldest son, Anders, seen on the donkey, and settled on a farmstead in Missouri. 3 more children, Simone, Frick, and Mathaline, center, right, and in the wagon respectively, soon followed. This photo, taken in 1916, captures all 4 of the children a few weeks before the tragedy. The 3 eldest kids were apparently playing fort in the hay barn and must have fallen asleep. Their father, Nicholas, drove the wooden hay sweep into the pile and dismembered all 3, in locations accurately suggested by the flaw in the photo. Madeline, the youngest, was inside the house with her mother at the time and not hurt. According to the son of a neighbor later interviewed by the author, the donkey later died in equally hideous fashion by getting its head caught in a barbed wire fence and nearly decapitating itself in the frenzy to get free. This final detail could not be corroborated. Photo 8 of 14. The Spectre of Viola Peters. Viola Peters was a well-born spinster who lived alone in the small rural town of McKaysville, Georgia. She was loved in her community for her charitable contributions to the Baptist church, the soup kitchen, and the local orphanage, especially during the Depression, when those institutions subsisted almost entirely on her largesse. In July 1935, Viola was brutally and murdered by a drifter named Tom Cullen, who had worked briefly at the nearby copper refinery. Cullen proceeded to stay on in Viola's house and savage her corpse for an additional 17 days before he was caught and captured. A posse of enraged locals stormed the county jail, took Cullen and lynched him from the old bridge over the Toccoa River. This photo was taken by Garrett Killian, a witness to the lynching, and caused quite a stir when it was published a few days later in the Atlanta Constitution. To most, it suggested that Viola's spirit achieved some measure of peace by attending her killer's execution, but some twisted minds saw in her forlorn countenance a longing to get one last look at her one and only lover. Photo 9 of 14. The Ghost of Sarah Eustace. Danvers State Hospital, formerly Danvers State Lunatic Asylum, was a Kirkbride-style psychiatric hospital built in 1874 on what was then an isolated site in rural Massachusetts. Like all Kirkbride asylums, it was famous for its Gothic architecture and its use of now outdated medical techniques to treat insanity. Danvers is often cited as the birthplace of the prefrontal lobotomy. Danvers has several other claims to fame. It was the inspiration for the fictional Arkham Sanatorium that appeared in several stories by H.P. Lovecraft, and which in turn inspired the Arkham Asylum in the fictional Batman universe. It was also where the cult horror film Session 9 was filmed. That film put the vast network of tunnels beneath Danvers to good cinematic effect. It's no accident the filmmakers chose to use the tunnels, as rumors of their haunting had dogged Danvers for over 100 years. The most famous story concerns Sarah Eustace, a patient who escaped her ward in 1955 and snuck into the tunnel system. Despite multiple searches and a week-long lockdown of the asylum, Sarah was never seen again. It was assumed she died down there, lost, thirsty, and alone. A nurse at Danvers named Gail Mallory became obsessed with Sarah's story and spent many of her off hours searching the tunnels for her remains. Though she never found a body, she did snap this photo in late 1966, which suggests Sarah Eustace walks the Danvers tunnels to this very day. Photo 10 of 14. The Stevenson Family Portrait. Who says ghosts don't have a sense of humor? The Stevensons were a wealthy Boston family, proud of the industry and longevity with which most of the clan was blessed. This portrait, taken in 1945, was an effort to gather the oldest Stevensons together in one of the youngest, Emilia Center, aged 102, was granted the honor of matriarch, while little Ophelia was the token child at 18 months. What the Stevenses did not realize until this photo was developed was that they had been joined that day by one of their deceased, James Paulman Stevenson, 1835 to 1932, seated at left between his niece Jenny and his cousin Alfred, was easily identified by several of those present and remembered fondly as a rascally uncle known for pranks and dirty jokes. Photo 11 of 14. The disappearances of Mrs. Yerno. During her later years, Josephine Yerno would take a walk every evening at dusk around her beloved neighborhood of Norwich, Connecticut. On November 12, 1935, she set out as usual and never returned. Extensive searches were conducted by a large team of volunteers and the Norwich police force, but no sign of her was ever found. 3 years later, Mrs. Yerno was found squatting in front of a neighbor's house, without a mark on her body and in perfect health. When asked where she had been, Mrs. Yerno was unable to understand the question. From her point of view, no time had passed at all. Against the advice of her neighbors and her doctor, she refused all medical treatment and resumed her life as if nothing had ever happened, including her nightly strolls. Another neighbor snapped this shot of her in the fall of 1938. Clouds of smoke from piles of burning leaves give it an appropriately eerie feel. On the same date, in November 1940, 5 years after her initial disappearance, Mrs. Yerno vanished again. This time, she was never seen again. Photo 12 of 14. The Fate of Sally York. In 1912, threshing of little Sally York, aged 9 in the cotton loom of the North Fork textile mill, was one of a handful of such accidents that helped legislators push through the Keating-Owings Act of 1916, the first child labor law in American history. From the time of the accident until the mill's closing 4 decades later, workers consistently complained of cold spots, strange noises, and sudden taps on the shoulder when nobody was near. The mill's foreman never paid these complaints any mind until their photograph surfaced in 1932. It was taken by a traveling photographer named Benny Johnson, who promptly sold it to the North Fork Gazette for an unprecedented $10. The mill had shut down for the Christmas holidays and was empty at the time. The photo was later blamed for the closing of the mill, though the Great Depression was the more likely cause of that. Photo 13 of 14. Lily Palmer's eyes. Lily Palmer was not quite 4 when she experienced what doctors would later call an acute onset of sensory hallucinations. This photo, taken by Lily's mother, Annette, on Halloween night 1952, purportedly captured the arrival of her disorder. Lily and her Filipino nanny were setting out for a round of trick-or-treating when the child suddenly screamed and began to claw at her eyes. It was some time before she was calm enough to speak, but when asked what she saw, Lily repeatedly spoke about things crawling in her eyes. Several days later, while unsupervised in her bedroom, Lily punctured both of her eyes with one of her mother's knitting needles. After receiving medical treatment, she was evaluated and committed and remained institutionalized for the rest of her life. First at Bellevue on the east side of Manhattan, and later at the Rockland Psychiatric Center in Orangeburg, where she remained until she died of a heart attack in March 2001. A call to one of her former caregivers at Rockland confirmed that Lily's episodes were most traumatic on and around Halloween night. But for the majority of her life, she could be heard begging and pleading for the staff to help her get these things out of her eyes. Photo 14 of 14. The Trinity Deception. This is one of several famous photographs taken of the first ever nuclear detonation, conducted by the U.S. Army on July 16, 1945, in the White Sands Proving Ground located in the Jornada del Muerto Desert, about 35 miles southeast of Socorro, New Mexico. The setting off of this implosion-design plutonium device, the same method used in the Fat Man device dropped on Nagasaki, ushered in the atomic age and the eventual arms race between the United States and Russia. Only a handful of people were aware that this photo was cropped before it was ever released to the public, and they are all now dead. One of them was the original photographer, who gave the author a copy of the original on the condition that it be kept out of the public eye until such a time that the citizens of the world could handle the ramifications of what it depicts. The author remains uncertain whether this criteria has been met, but given that he is likely to own the last existent copy, he has decided his responsibility rests with the truth. The end. In case you're wondering, the last photo uncropped shows some UFOs, though it is a bit hard to see. I really like this creepypasta because it's kind of a collection, an anthology of smaller urban legend-like creepypastas, with some pretty eerie photos to go along with the tales. Stairs. In 1984, there lived an old widowed lady by herself in a 2-story house who was completely immobile and bound to her wheelchair. Ever since the mysterious death of her husband, she required the aid of a carer who would visit her daily to help her with her everyday tasks. What made it even more difficult was the fact that there are 2 floors of the house, which were only connected by an old staircase inside. When the old lady needed to move between the 2, the carer would have to carry her frail body like an infant up and down the stairs. One day, the police received a call from the widow. There had been a murder. Since police units were scarce at the time, and the murderer had already fled the scene, only one detective was sent out to conduct the initial crime scene report. He arrived to see the carer's body splayed out on the floor, with her vocal cords ripped out in a pool of blood on the first level of the house, with the old lady atop the staircase in her wheelchair watching him, still and silently, seemingly in shock. He could immediately rule her out as a suspect due to her inability to move up and down the stairs, and because she was trapped up there the time the murder took place. It was similar to the death of her husband many years ago, who had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs. The detective put on his gloves, took photos, swabbed for evidence, and covered the body until the coroner arrived later. All routine business. He scoped the house downstairs for any clues, then asked the old lady if he could look upstairs. She insisted that she was upstairs the whole time, and that no one, apart from her, had been up there that day. But regardless of this, the detective ascended the staircase, to which she hesitantly moved aside. Beyond the staircase was a narrow corridor, with 3 closed doors along it. He checked behind each of the doors. The empty bedroom, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. He became anxious as he slowly made his way to the final bedroom, where the old lady slept. He opened it and everything seemed normal. A bed, a wardrobe, and a bedside table with a lamp. He checked every wall of the room in horror. It was not what he discovered, but what he didn't discover that made him stop dead in his tracks and slowly reach for the gun in his holster. It was a detail so minor they had completely overlooked it on the last investigation of the husband's death. There was no phone upstairs. He suddenly heard a noise as he withdrew his gun and rushed out of the room, only to find an empty wheelchair atop the stairs. Voicebox, a Ticci Toby love story. Welp, this is it, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most cringe, weird, unironically disturbing, worst creepypasta I have ever fucking read. Every single Jeff the Killer type story that we have read across this iceberg has been leading up to this very moment. And you wanna know what's the best fucking part? It's 12 chapters long. Now, I will say, grammar-wise, there are definitely creepypastas that we have read that are worse in that regard. But as far as just the pure content, like the fucking meat and cheese of the story, this is particularly bad on a multitude of levels. But it's hard to do it justice without at least getting into it. So, why don't we read a little bit of the first chapter? Quote, "The day my life changed forever started out like every other day. It was the same routine for the last 7 years. Ever since I had turned 10, I woke up at 6 a.m., took a quick shower, tossed on my favorite black skinny jeans, my black Hollywood Undead t-shirt, my crimson hoodie, and my red and black running shoes. I pulled my long brown hair up into a ponytail, covered the bruises on my pale face with some makeup, grabbed my backpack for school, and woke up my 6-year-old little sister, Benna. I quickly got her dressed and ready for school, feed her breakfast, and took her over to her babysitter. Luckily, her babysitter only lives a few houses down, so I had time to drop her off and rush back home to make breakfast for my parents. Just like every day, I hoped to have breakfast cooked and be out the door before my parents woke up. But once again, I was just a little too slow. As I finished cooking, my mother walked in and gave me her usual greeting. A punch to the stomach that dropped me to my knees, and a swift kick to the ribs.
Get your lazy ass up and clean the mess you made in the kitchen, Shayla, you useless bitch,
she said as she calmly sat down to eat the breakfast I had cooked. I nodded quickly and got to work on the kitchen, still hoping to get out of there before my father came down. I'm just glad that I'm able to protect Benna from our parents. As much as my mother's continual physical and emotional abuse hurt, it was nowhere near as bad as my father's punishments. I just had a punishment last night since Mother had to work late, and I didn't want to get another one after Mother left for work, so I cleaned up as fast as I could. Luckily that day, I was able to get out before he came down. So for me, it started out a better day than most. After catching the bus to school, I hurried to my locker. Once again, I hoped that I could avoid Jeannie and her group. Jeannie, her boyfriend Biff, and Biff's friend Joel, and Joel's girlfriend Roxanne were the biggest bullies in the school. They were also the head cheerleaders and the captain and quarterback of the football team. So of course, in the teacher's eyes, they could do no wrong. They had bullied me ever since 3rd grade, and the abuse from them got worse every year. I quickly grabbed my books for the first half of the day and started walking as quickly as I could without running to English class. Luckily, I made it to class without being caught. Unfortunately, I knew there would be no hiding from them after school. They had made sure of that the day before when they caused me to get detention. Jeannie had been beating me in the girls' locker room after gym class, and when she heard someone come in, she rammed her head into the locker and screamed. So of course everyone believed that I had been attacking her. I had tried for years to tell the teachers and the principal what really happens between Jeannie, her friends, and me, but of course they never believed me. No one ever believed me, probably because I have a couple disorders to make people think I'm a freak. It's not my fault that my eyes are 2 different colors. My right eye is a piercing light blue, like the color of the Siberian Husky's eyes. My left is a bright emerald green. I also can't help that I was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome when I was 10, shortly after my older sister Rebecca and I were in a car accident. I survived without any physical damage, but my sister didn't, and my parents always blame me for that. I can't help the twitching that happens or the spontaneous low-pitched sinister-sounding giggles that freak people out. Anyway, the day went on like usual. People either ignored me or made fun of me. At lunch I sat at the library by myself. I never ate lunch at school. My parents wouldn't let me take a lunch nor give me money to buy lunch. After school I went to detention. No one else was there today, so I had plenty of time to do my homework. I knew that I wouldn't be able to do it tonight. Mother and father would be waiting for me to come home from detention so that they could beat me again. I knew that Benna would already be in bed by that time I got home. I hoped that mother and father didn't hurt her while I wasn't there, I just hope that Mother didn't leave me alone with Father again, like the last time I got detention. I didn't think I could take Father's punishment 2 days in a row. I was still sore from the night before. I really hated my life." Unquote. So, have you picked up what kind of story this is yet? Yes, indeed. We have yet another one of those creepypastas where it deals with sexual assault, child abuse, and probably one of the most over-the-top, terrible life stories someone could possibly have, all as justification for the Jeff the Killer style murderer that Shayla is going to become. It's kind of similar to Clockwork in that sense, I suppose, but it goes a fair bit farther than that story. See, those bullies she was talking about earlier do end up getting her during or after her detention, and they decide that today's the day that they're going to kill her, but not before brutally ing her. Yes, indeed, this story has one of the most fucked up starts to nearly any creepypasta I have ever read. Now, I'm not sure if I've ever actually expressed this before in this iceberg. I mean, this series has been going on for like over a year, so I can't remember everything I've said across these many hours. But I do want to note that I don't think that things like child abuse and sexual assault should be off limits in creepypastas or anything for that matter. And as a matter of fact, some of my favorite creepypastas ever created focus around these topics in particular. But for me personally, when all of this heavy shit is just used as a cheap justification for this edgy teenager to then become a serial killer, and now we're meant to feel sorry for them when they start, killing innocent people for no fucking reason, it all feels kind of tasteless, I suppose. It'd be one thing if the story acknowledged for like once in a while that the character, even though they went through all these terrible things, is clearly a bad person because now they're hurting normal people, but you will find in almost all these cases with these creepypastas that they will not do that. I suppose sometimes it could be implied, but with this one in particular, it pretty much just does the fucking opposite. I feel bad for Shayla because it sounds like she's living the worst life someone could possibly live at that age. But all that sympathy is going to go immediately out the window as soon as she starts killing people that aren't directly hurting her. Because I could at least see, if it was just a straight up revenge story, killing all the people who harmed her, yes, maybe it's not the most ideal or moral thing to do, but if these people are literal murderers then, I'm gonna be on the side of the person who, was just defending themselves and getting themselves out of a bad situation. But as soon as she starts killing people that are just innocent people, that sympathy is gone. And as expected, as soon as this event with the bullies starts going on, something in Shayla snaps in that moment. A voice in her head tells her she needs to stand up and fight back. And so she does, and she ends up killing both the bullies and tearing out their throats, or voice boxes, and then eating them, I guess. Now the voice in her head goes on about how she should have listened to her sooner. Quote, "You can call me Voicebox. You really should have listened to me years ago when your father started punishing us."
I'm sorry, Voicebox. I couldn't hear you clearly until just now with Joel.
"I understand, Shayla, my dear. But you hear me now, and that is what is important. I will never let anyone hurt you ever again. Whenever you need me, I will be here."
Thank you, Voicebox. We will have to run after we kill Mother and Father, but what should we do about Benna?
"We will take her to Grandmama and Grandpapa. They are the only ones who can trust keep Benna safe. They would be appalled at what our parents have done to us if they knew." We finished the walk in silence. I decided to wait for Mother and Father to go to bed before killing them. As much as I want to make them suffer for everything they have done, I also just wanted to get rid of them. Get Benna to our grandparents and get out of here. Besides, there was always the chance that they could scream and alert the neighbors or wake up Benna, and that was a risk I wasn't willing to take. Unquote. Ending of chapter 1. Now, from here, the next chapter is about Shayla doing what else but quickly killing her parents, eating their voice boxes because that's just what she does now, and then, well, perhaps I ought to just read. Quote, "Oh, how I love the taste. Once I finished my treat, I went and took a quick shower since the killing had been so silent I didn't need to worry about leaving quickly. I loved the feel of the warm water caressing my skin. I felt something wet and furry brush against my calves, and quickly looked over my shoulder to see what it was. I felt my eyes widen and my mouth dropped open when I saw that I now had a very beautiful red tail. I concentrated on moving it, and it moved. I ran my hands through the fur and shivered in pleasure as I stroked my new tail. I noticed that the tip of my tail was black. It looked like a foxtail. I felt my ears twitch, but they were no longer at the size of my head. I reached up and found large furry ears on top of my head. I would have screamed, but I knew I couldn't draw attention to the house, or I would be in deep trouble. I quickly turned the water off and wrung the water out of my hair, which I now noticed was blood red, and out of my tail. I had to see what I looked like. I stepped out of the shower, dried off, and used the towel to wipe the steam off the mirror. I was shocked when I saw my new looks. I had 2 red fox ears with black tips on top of my head, a healed scar on my right cheek from where Joel had cut me, but the most striking difference was my left eye. Instead of the brilliant emerald green I had since birth, it was black with a slit blood red, purple, and there was black oozing from it, like I was crying black tears. The way it was slitted reminded me of a cat's eye. I tilted my head and smiled my big toothy grin, and noticed that my canine teeth were longer and sharper than they had been. I loved my new look." Unquote. So yeah, she transforms into a creepypasta anime cat girl.
And you know what's even more interesting than that?
After Shayla, or Voicebox, brings Benna to her grandmama and grandpapa's house, she goes to kill the girl bullies from earlier by killing their parents and then torturing them, until who else but Jeff the fucking killer walks up behind her, and we have the biggest tonal shift in any story ever. Quote, "Who are you and what do you want?" I growled.
"Name's Jeff. Jeff the killer. What I wanted, sweet cheeks, was to kill these idiots. Unfortunately, it looks like I got here too late. Well, not too late to watch the show you put on with those girls. I gotta say I'm impressed with how you handle those Skinners."
He chuckled. "Don't give him your real name, Shayla. Tell him that you are Voicebox. We will share that name from now on. Alright, Voicebox." "The name is Voicebox, not Sweet Cheeks," I replied. I wasn't about to let my guard down around Jeff. He is, after all, a killer.
"Nice name, Sweet Cheeks. You know, I have some friends that would find you as interesting as I do. You ever heard of the creepypastas?"
"No? What are the creepypastas?"
"Well, to humans, we're urban legends and scary stories. But what we really are is practically immortal killers. Most of us live in Slender Mansion with Slender Man. You do realize that you are a new creepypasta, right?"
"Really? So that's what I am?"
"Yep. And that means you can live with us in Slender Mansion."
"I don't know. Shayla, go with him. I know that everything will be alright. We can trust Slender Man. Are you sure we can trust him?" "I'm sure. Slender Man may be a killer, but he would never harm us." "Alright. Okay, let me grab my backpack and we can head out."
"No problem, Sweet Cheeks."
He grinned bigger as I growled at him. "My name is Voicebox! Don't call me Sweet Cheeks!" I sheathed my Skinners and left the room. Jeff followed behind me and we left the house. I grabbed my backpack and motioned for Jeff to take the lead. He smirked as he led me deeper into the wood. We soon reached a large cherry tree in the clearing. I was confused as to why Jeff had led me here, until he walked up to the tree and shoved the key into a small knothole in the trunk. There was a slight rumbling sound as the doorway appeared in the trunk of the tree. Jeff motioned for me to follow him as he walked through the doorway. The first thing I saw after I passed through the doorway was a huge mansion. It looked slightly creepy and possibly abandoned. Jeff grabbed my wrist and tugged me towards the mansion.
Well, this is Slender Mansion. Don't worry, sweet cheeks. It looks much better on the inside.
Jeff, quit calling me sweet cheeks, I said as he opened the door.
Hey, Slendy, I'm back, and I brought a friend, he yelled.
Child, do not call me Slendy. And you know you are not supposed to. I heard the deep voice trail off. I looked away from Jeff and saw an 8 or 9 foot tall man in a black business suit and no face standing in the foyer. Daughter, you are alive, the man Jeff called Slendy said as he scooped me up into a tight hug. I thought you both your sister and you died with your mother.
Ha! Slendy. What do you mean, daughter? Since when do you got kids?
Jeff looked as confused as I was. I'm sorry, but I think you might be confused. I just killed my parents yesterday. Shayla, you would not remember since you were very young when your mother died. But did your aunt never tell you? What about your sister Rebecca? Is she still alive too?
Who's Shayla? She said her name is Voicebox.
Shayla, Slenderman is telling you the truth. He is our father. The people you called your parents were actually our mother's sister and her husband. Benna is our cousin. Our aunt should have told you about our mother years ago, but she never knew who our father was. Now answer our father. Tell him what happened to Rebecca. He deserves to know everything, and I mean everything. He needs to know what our uncle did to us. I'll tell him about Rebecca, but I don't want to tell him everything until we are alone. It is no one else's business. Very well. Father, I do go by Voicebox now. As for Rebecca, she died 10 years ago in a car accident. I'm sorry. No one ever told me that I was adopted. That is all right, my dear. I have mourned for your mother and sister for 17 years. I am just happy that I have you back. Come, daughter. Let me introduce you to the rest of the household. Then later tonight we shall sit down and get to know each other. Father finally put me down and led me into the living room. There were 6 guys sitting around playing games, talking or reading. Everyone, I have someone I would like to introduce to you. With that, 6 pairs of eyes looked over to me. Everyone, this is my daughter, Voicebox, unquote. Yes, the rest of the story takes place at the Creepypasta Mansion, owned by Slenderman, where all the creepypastas go to live and hang out, I suppose. Oh, and our sweet little Voicebox is actually the daughter of Slenderman, and is super powerful, and as the story goes on, she ends up getting into a relationship with Ticci Toby, but Jeff the Killer also kind of wants a piece of that furry-tailed ass. But also, the voice inside her head is actually the voice of her dead older sister, who Slenderman later is able to cast a spell on, later for her to be her own being again, and so now there are 2 Voicebox killer girls, but also Clockwork, yes, that Clockwork, comes in and kisses Ticci Toby, which starts this whole teen drama between Voicebox, Ticci Toby, and Clockwork, and also Jeff the Killer, and so Voicebox has to deal with that, but also Voicebox and her sister at one point get captured by fucking Zalgo, yes, that Zalgo, so they can both be his wives because everybody wants to fuck Voicebox. And there's a whole chapter about them being groomed by him until they finally escape his place. And then, that plot point is then never brought up ever again. So, You have this story featuring the most Mary Sue of Mary Sue characters ever to exist, and a mansion full of other insufferable, evil emo teenagers that all whine and joke and fuck about how they have issues, but they all also actively, day by day, go out and kill innocent people for literally no fucking reason, including, might I add, children. Something that you might think would be a sore spot for some of them, in particular Voicebox, but apparently not. How am I supposed to care about these characters, let alone root for them in any regard, when they are so unbelievably unlikable? The story really acts like we should care about Voicebox and her relationship drama, or her new relationship with her father Slenderman, or her past trauma, which is brought up a ton in this story, all seemingly as ways to make us sympathize and empathize with her as a character, yet all along she also will kill people for no fucking reason, children included, several times throughout the story in extremely brutal ways, which throws away any sympathy for their traumatic past you might have for them, or at least it does me. It's such a strange experience seeing the author try so desperately to get me to care about a character, and then they keep making the character do things that makes me not want to fucking care about them. I mean, it would be one thing if it was something like The Devil's Rejects, where it's clearly following a bunch of terrible, awful, vicious piece of shit serial killers, and, you know, they're at least fun to see do things, but Voicebox and stories like these really have a cognitive dissonance for me personally, and I'm sure many others as well. It also doesn't help that normally this type of story ends after about the first act that would be in this story, but this one goes on for much longer. In fact, it goes on forever, with the story aimlessly jumping from one plot point to the next, with absolutely no narrative cohesion to speak of. It's 12 chapters, but it really feels like nothing fucking happened of significance. And what makes it all the more funny and worthless is after the story is done aimlessly jumping from one plot point to the next, it randomly ends the whole story on a "and that's how I met your mother" ending, with the whole story secretly being Voicebox telling her and Ticci Toby's children the story of how they met each other. And while I haven't really mentioned it a whole lot here, some of the killings in this, I will say, are pretty unique, but also seem exceptionally cruel. Like, at one point, her and her sister are angry at, like, these people because they're, like, upset about their relationships not working out or something. And so what they do is they kill these two guys, tear off their schlongs, and use them to their girlfriends to death. Yeah. So in between all the creepypasta teenage drama, you have some pretty fucked up shit that's going on in the background. It is like tonally everywhere. Shout out to YouTuber Hoodoo Hoodlum's Revenge, by the way, for managing to read through this whole thing, which if you want a detailed reading of the whole thing, I'd highly recommend you go and give his video series a watch. I can't cover every single thing that this story does wrong and every single cringy, weird, and fucked up thing it covers, so I really would recommend going and listening to it if you're a fan of the more cringy type of shit that I cover on this iceberg. But for now, I think it's time we freshen our palate with something genuinely good. Better than good, actually. A fucking fantastic story that I have been waiting up until now to tell you about. Some of you already know what it is. Some of you have been requesting it for quite a while, since this iceberg's inception, in fact. And to the rest of you, that story is Borrasca. Well, it seems like it's finally time to talk about one of, if not the greatest creepypastas ever written. You all thought I wasn't going to include this one, you silly billies. I just wanted to save this one of the best, for near last. Written by C.K. Walker, Borrasca follows Sam Walker and his family as they move into the small town of Drisking, Missouri, one summer, and while his sister Whitney is beside herself upset over losing her friends and new boyfriend from the town they used to live in, Sam is younger and quickly adapts to his new environment, and soon befriends two other kids, Kyle and Kimber. The three of them make for a great little group of friends, and the two of them eventually bring Sam to their secret treehouse in the woods, called the Triple Tree, where they make him do a little ritual before heading up on into it. He must carve his name into the tree and then say the following: "Under the triple tree, there is a man who waits for me, and should I go or should I stay, my face the same, either way." Once they head into the treehouse, it's there that Sam first hears the sound of something metallic, a buzzing sound that seemed to echo through the woods, making Kyle and Kimber go silent before they tell him the urban legend of Borrasca. Quote, Kimber was in the middle of reciting the alphabet backwards when a loud, metallic grinding suddenly pierced the calm mountain air like a gunshot. Kimber stopped talking and we spent a few minutes staring at each other, waiting for the noise to end. Parker curled into Kimber and put his hands over his ears. After what seemed like 10 whole minutes, the sound ended as suddenly as it had begun. "What was that?" I asked, and Parker mumbled something into Kimber's sweatshirt. "Do you guys know?" I tried again. Kimber stared at her feet. She crossed and uncrossed them. "Well, it's nothing," Kyle finally answered. "We hear it sometimes in town. It's not a big deal. It's just louder up here." "But what makes that sound?" "Borrasca," Kimber whispered, without taking her eyes off her feet. "Who's that?" I asked. "Not who, where," Kyle answered. "It's a place." "Another town?" "No, it's just a place in the woods." "Oh, bad things happen there," Kimber said, more to herself than me. "Like what?" "Bad things," Kimber repeated. "Yeah, don't ever try to find it, dude," Kyle said behind me. "Or bad things will happen to you, too." "But like, what bad things?" I turned around. Kyle shrugged and Kimber stood up and walked over to the rope ladder. "We'd better go. I have to get home to my mom," she said. We climbed down the ladder one by one and then started to walk back to the trailhead in an unfamiliar silence. I was dying of curiosity about Borrasca, but couldn't decide if and what to ask about. "So who lives there? Where?" Kyle asked. "Borrasca, the skinned man," Parker answered. Pfft, Kyle laughed. "Only babies believe that. Like, men who are skinned? Like their skin is gone?" I asked excitedly. "Yeah, that's what some kids say. Most of us stop believing that, though, when we turn double digits," Kyle said, unquote. Now, I'm tempted to not say anything else story-wise about this tale here, but I will say one spoiler that happens at the end of part 1, that being that suddenly, Sam's older sister Whitney goes missing, and Sam's father is a cop, and so obviously, everyone tries to find her, but no luck. The next bulk of the story takes place 5 years after her disappearance, and I'm going to leave it at that. Normally, I would go through almost all or most of the story in this series, but once again, I must pull that card. I want you to go and read or listen to a reading of this story yourself. Take it as the highest source of praise from me that I can possibly give a story, that I truly believe that you owe it to yourself to experience Borrasca for yourself. And Mr. Creepypasta in particular has a really good reading of it, so I'd recommend that, though I'm sure there are other good readings of it on here as well. Borrasca is a story full of rich and complex characters, all who go through several character arcs and are subjected to terrible trauma. There is a ton of twists and turns, mysteries to be solved, and payoffs that left me sitting in shock that the story went to those sorts of places. I know I'm speaking vaguely here, but this creepypasta is so good, I hesitate to even call it a creepypasta. I hold it right up there with tales like Pen Pal, The Showers, and Psychosis. So, do yourself a favor and give it a read or a listen sometime soon. And only through that will you find out what secrets the town of Drisking holds, what happened to Sam's older sister, and what is the truth about Borrasca. The shortest scary story ever told. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock on the door.
That's it!
We've reached it! And not a second too soon. I can hear the island dwellers fast approach. It's time we made that wish. But first, let me ask you something. Did you ever wonder what it means to dream in the first place? We all do it, but it's sort of like a strange state of being, where all our fantasies come true, the good and the bad. I suppose it's like our brain can't help but tell stories to itself, even as we sleep. Perhaps that is truly what makes us so special. That good, bad, scary or sweet, we all enjoy a good story, whether we're hearing it or telling it to one another. But they all must come to an end. Even the most fanciful of dreams must abruptly stop with one's awakening. So then tell me, how would you have our story end? What's your dream? To what message shall you awaken? Comment down below. Tell me, what is your one single wish? No matter how big or small, cool or cringe. Tell me, O traveler, my faithful companion. And if you need time to think upon it, please do, and let me know. And in the meantime, I shall be granting my wish, the reason we came here to begin with. After all, how else was I going to get a giant mecha owl to escape the island and rain terror on all of my enemies? Yeah, fuck you, Creepypasta Island! I pulled this one out of my fucking ass, just like the rest of ya. Until next time, traveler, this has been Dylan the fucking Night Owl, flying off into the stratosphere! Wow. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. That was finally the grand finale to the Creepypasta Iceberg. I hope you all enjoyed it. It's been a year-long process getting this whole thing done. To be fair, this whole iceberg could have been done a lot faster had I just, well, only read the stuff that was just on the iceberg, but as you can tell, around halfway through this iceberg, I just started adding in new creepypastas each time, more and more and more and more, because, what can I say, I'm really passionate about creepypastas, and I was just having too much fun with this series to just let it all go so quickly. And for this finale, I tried to include as many stories as I possibly could, so I hope that the wait was well worth it. I made sure to include some of the very best and some of the very worst, as I'm sure you just saw. That being said, a lot of you have been asking me if there's going to be a supercut of the Creepypasta Iceberg, and yes, of course there is. There's going to be a supercut, which I believe will be somewhere around 17 hours or so, something like that. And it will be uploaded sometime in November. So look forward to that. There may be a couple additional little secret entries added into that version of the iceberg as well. I can't promise how much will be different, but there will at least be a couple new additions just to throw in there that I thought were appropriate to add. I know a lot of you found my channel through this series, so I want to thank you so very, very much if you have been watching through this whole time. I know many of you watch this series over and over again, and you marathon it, or you listen to it while you're at work, or you're drawing, or even to go to sleep to, and I just want to let you know that, well, I'm very thankful to you all, and I'm glad that you've enjoyed this series. And also, you might be wondering, what comes next? Well, obviously I still have my other series I've got going on my channel, such as my Internet Fables, and, well, I'm going to be doing a couple more video game based stuff as well. But as far as icebergs go, I actually have a super big, super detailed new iceberg series that I cannot wait to share with you very, very soon. I'm not sure I want to reveal what the iceberg is about just yet. You're gonna have to subscribe and wait for later for me to fully reveal that. But as a hint, it will be very similar to a YouTube iceberg series, as far as its variety in content. Of course, if you want to know what the next iceberg series is right away, you can always follow me on Patreon or become a member here on YouTube to get some behind-the-scenes exclusive news and updates for the upcoming months. Which, speaking of, I want to take this opportunity to make sure and thank all of my loyal and very helpful and supportive members on Patreon and here on YouTube, including all of my Night Eggs and Night Owlets, as well as a special thank you to all my great Night Owls, including Star Punch Gaming, Forgotten Ace, Macabre Kaiju, Ho Hot, Medusa's Hex, and Tony Terramaya, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of the real OGs out there known as the Arch Owls, including the Jammin' Justice, the Spooky's House of Jump Scares Lore Master, Doggy NGT, the Chi Vibe Zen Garden Party, and the Super Saiyan Sword. Thank you all so very, very much for watching and supporting this channel. I also want to take this time to thank artist Mr. Megiddo over on Twitter.com for making this commemorative, wonderful piece of me entering the Creepypasta Island all the way back on part 1, as well as these awesome pieces and their variations by the legendary McDowell Devon over on Twitter. Once again, being quite commemorative of the Creepypasta Iceberg and Island, though this one it seems I'm quite well off. I've quite thoroughly destroyed Sonic.exe, as you can see, as well as the other creepypastas. Oh, and also they made this cute little one of me drinking some coffee or tea with this cute little owl next to me. Additionally, I also want to thank my good friend and artist, Philemon, for making this wonderful piece of me in a cape and cool gothic attire with my skull cane and a little owl and an owl belt, and just overall a super cool drawing as a celebration for me reaching 50k subscribers very recently. And lastly, thank you to Bandworld for making me this cool little poster-esque little drawing of me in a owl form and, you know, looking off to the side. It's quite cool. You guys can expect more updates over on Patreon as well as on my memberships and Discord and what have you. And if you want some other updates outside of like the more secret details, you can also follow me over on Twitter.com, where I'm trying to be a little bit more active over there when I can. But all that said, thank you all so very much for watching, hopefully enjoying this series as it finally comes to a close. But, as I said, everything must come to an end. But the nice thing about endings is it's just the last page in one book. And let me tell you, friend, we have a lot of fucking books around here. So, I hope to see you next time in whatever book we open up next. But until then, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.